He refused to leave her even when it burned. They begged him to move. Flames licked the trees. Sirens screamed in the distance, but Rook wouldn't leave. The medics thought he was just a dog, until they saw the way he guarded her, the way he winced with every step, his paws raw and bleeding, but never moved. She was just a girl, buried beneath a fallen tree. And she hadn't spoken a word in 2 years. But now, she was whispering. Not to the rescuers. To him. This is the story of a dog no one believed in, and the girl he refused to give up on. The fire didn't come with warning. It came like a thief in the night quiet at first, almost curious, licking at the edge of the old barn's roof like it was testing what it could take. By the time anyone noticed, it wasn't asking permission anymore. It was devouring. Arden Wells remembered the sound before the heat, the frantic crackling that snapped her from sleep, like branches breaking in a storm. Then came the smoke, thick and alive, swallowing the air, the walls, her breath. Her mother's voice had screamed once, just once, and then the world went red. She remembered the weight of her father's arms as he pulled her through the hallway, his coughing loud against her ear. She remembered the way he had stopped, and then nothing. She woke up in a hospital bed 3 days later. Her hands were blackened with soot. Her voice was gone. They said she hadn't suffered burns. A miracle, one nurse whispered. But Arden didn't hear her. Or maybe she did, and just didn't care. The voice that once laughed, once begged for bedtime stories, once called for her parents' sit had retreated somewhere deep, curled into itself like a frightened animal. She hadn't spoken since. They buried her parents in 2 matching caskets beneath a maple tree that used to shade their front porch. The house was ash now, bones of charred timber still smoldering when the news vans arrived and left again. Arden stood between the gravestones in a borrowed dress, her hair pulled back too tightly, her eyes dry and wide. A social worker named Karen with lemon perfume and a clipboard told her gently, "You'll be going to live with your Uncle Micah." She didn't say, "because there's no one else." But she didn't have to. Micah Wells had been her father's older cousin, a man who rarely spoke, rarely smiled, and built things with his hands when words failed him. Arden barely remembered him, a tall, silent figure at Thanksgiving dinners, always whittling something in the corner. His wife had died 6 years prior, no children. He lived in a cabin just outside Red Hollow, surrounded by pine, rust, and the smell of sawdust. It wasn't a home, but it was what was left. The drive out was long and silent. Micah didn't try to make small talk. He just kept his eyes on the road, his hands firm on the wheel, glancing at her only once when she traced the condensation on the window with her finger. A crooked flame. He said nothing. His cabin sat at the edge of the woods, where the trees grew thick, and the wind always carried something with it: pine, smoke, a memory. The mailbox was leaning, paint peeled. There was no welcome mat. Micah parked the truck and stepped out. Arden didn't move until he opened her door. She stepped out, blinking into the dull afternoon light. A woodpecker knocked somewhere in the distance. Nothing about the air here smelled like her old life. That scent had burned with it. He helped her carry in the duffel bag someone else had packed for her. Inside were clothes that didn't fit, a few pencils, and the last picture she'd drawn before the fire. Her parents holding hands, her in between, a yellow sun above. The paper was crumpled, smoke-stained, but intact. Micah had cleared out a small room for her, a twin bed, a dresser, a window that faced the trees. She sat on the edge of the bed, still clutching the drawing. He lingered in the doorway for a moment, the shadows cutting across his lined face like cracks in old wood. "If you need anything," he said, voice rough, "I'm in the room down the hall." She didn't nod, didn't blink, just stared at the blank wall. Micah left the door open. That night, the nightmares came. Not screams, not sobs, just violent twisting movements under the covers. Her limbs kicked and her hands curled into fists, but no sound escaped her mouth. Micah stood in the hallway, hand hovering over her doorframe, but didn't go in. In the morning, she was already awake, sitting on the floor, a sketchpad balanced on her knees. On the page, a charred house, crooked smoke rising above it, and a girl with no mouth. She never looked up when Micah brought her breakfast, but she ate it. That was enough for now. In the days that followed, Micah tried in his own quiet way. He fixed the loose stairs so they wouldn't creak at night, built a little stool so she could reach the sink. left fresh pencils beside her plate without saying a word. And Arden drew. Every single day. Scenes of darkness. People without faces, hands reaching from fire, trees bent in unnatural ways. Sometimes just eyes watching, waiting, wide, with fear. The silence wasn't passive, was a barrier, thick and deliberate. And Micah, though aching to fix what had been broken, knew better than to rush her. He'd tried once, gently asking, "You want to talk about what you're drawing?" She'd looked at him, just for a moment, then back down at her paper. He hadn't asked again. He spent most of his time in the shed, carving table legs or sanding cabinet doors. Wood he could understand. Wood was simple. People weren't, not anymore. But even in all her stillness, Arden noticed things. She noticed the way Micah's hands trembled when he thought no one was looking. She noticed the faded photograph tucked into a corner frame him and a woman with curly hair standing by a truck, both smiling like they still believed in forever. She noticed that no one came to visit. No one called. The two of them were like ghosts in that house, one made of ash, the other of sawdust. And in the corners of her drawings, small new details began to appear. A dog's paw print, a pair of eyes in the dark, not yet formed, but watching, waiting. Micah Wells wasn't afraid of silence. He'd lived with it long enough to know it by name. It came after the accident that took Elysius' wife of 16 years. It moved into the empty side of the bed, curled up in the corners of his workshop, slipped into his coffee in the morning, and lingered in his tool shed at night. Silence wasn't a stranger in his house. It was family. But the kind Arden brought with her, that was different. Hers wasn't the silence of age or memoried. It was something sharper, heavier, like a door slammed shut from the inside. It didn't just muffle sound. It swallowed it. In the first few weeks she lived with him, Micah found himself listening more than speaking. For footsteps, for breath, for the scratch of pencil on paper, any sign she was still inside herself. Most mornings, she'd already be awake, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside her bed, a sketchpad open on her lap, always drawing, not childish scribbles or doodles. Her hands moved with eerie precision, like they knew what they were chasing, like something inside her was spilling out faster than she could stop it. Micah never interrupted. He'd simply set her plate on the table, scrambled eggs, toast cut diagonal, always a glass of orange juice. She never looked at him when she ate, never nodded or smiled, but she ate, and that was enough for now. Arden barely left the house. When she did, it was to wander the edge of the tree line behind the cabin, staying where Micah could see her from the porch. Sometimes she'd stand there for 20 minutes, just staring at the woods like she was waiting for them to speak. Then she'd turn around and go back inside, close the door, and go back to her paper. Her drawings were beautiful and terrifying. Charcoal flames that twisted like snakes, eyes floating in ink-black skies, a girl with no face, standing beneath a crumbling roof. Sometimes a shadow would appear behind a crooked figure, tall and thin, mouth open like it was trying to scream but couldn't. Micah kept them all. He didn't say it out loud, but he believed the drawings were her voice now. Not just expression, but survival. Every jagged line was a word she couldn't speak. Every smudge, a memory she didn't know how to carry. One night, when she was asleep, he found a drawing tucked under her pillow. It was a split image on one side, a house in flames. On the other, a small cabin surrounded by trees. Between them stood a bridge, made entirely of hands reaching for each other, but never quite touching. He sat with it for a long time. Once a week, Micah took her into town. Not because she wanted to go, but because they had to. Supplies, groceries, the occasional appointment. Arden never made a sound during these trips, never looked at anyone. She'd sit in the truck with her sketchpad while he grabbed what they needed. People whispered, "Poor girl. That's the one who lost her folks, right? She hasn't spoken a single word," they say. "She's not broken, just bent. She'll grow out of it." Micah hated those whispers, not because they were cruel, but because they were lazy. Arden wasn't bent. She was bracing, like a tree that had survived a storm and leaned toward the sun in its own strange way. What they saw as damage, Micah had begun to see as resilience. Still, there were hard days, days when she refused to come out of her room, days when he found new drawings buried in the trash torn, shredded, angry. Days when her hands trembled so badly she couldn't even hold a pencil. He never said a word on those days. Just left a cup of warm tea outside her door and sat on the porch, carving tiny birds out of pine scraps until the sun went down. He made her a shelf, simple, rough-edged, but sturdy. When she saw it, she didn't say anything, of course, but she hung her drawings on it. Not all of them, just 3. One of the maple tree where her parents were buried, one of the cabin, and one of a girl curled up in the lap of something that looked half shadow, half wolf. Micah didn't ask, but that night, while sanding down a piece of oak in the shed, he looked up at the stars and whispered to the cold air, "She's still in there. Please, don't let her disappear." Arden started school again in early March. The counselor at Red Hollow Elementary recommended a part-time schedule mornings only, with a classroom aide nearby. Micah sat through the meeting, nodding while words like adjustment, accommodation, and selective mutism circled the room like paper planes that never landed. Arden sat in the corner of the room, back straight, hands folded. She didn't fidget, didn't react when they spoke about her like she wasn't there, didn't even blink when the principal called her fragile. Her first week went quietly, literally, but things cracked on day 6. It happened during roll call. The substitute teacher was new, young, nervous, her voice too chirpy. Arden Wells? Silence. The teacher cleared her throat. "Miss Wells?" Still nothing. A few students snickered. One whispered, "She's broken." That did it. Arden's hands clenched under the desk. Her breath hitched. And then she stood up, her chair scraping so loudly it silenced the class. Her face was pale, her eyes locked on the teacher, but she said nothing. Nothing at all. Just stood there, as if daring anyone to make her speak. The teacher faltered. "It's okay, you can sit." Arden didn't move, not for a full minute. Then she slowly picked up her sketch pad, walked to the trash bin, and dropped it in. Every page, every drawing. Then she left. Micah found her sitting on the cabin porch when he got home, knees pulled to her chest, eyes hollow. He didn't ask what happened, just sat beside her in the cold and said, "Some people don't know how to handle quiet things. That doesn't mean you stop being who you are." She didn't react. But the next morning, her sketch pad was back on the table. And the drawing on the first page? A girl in a paper crown standing at the edge of a forest. Behind her, a shadow in the shape of a dog was beginning to form. Some people speak to be heard. Arden drew to survive. Her world was made of graphite and silence. That was how she told the truth without noise, without explanation. Her sketches weren't about talent. They were messages. Flares fired from a place no one else could see. And if you didn't pay attention, you'd miss everything. Micah began to notice small things. How her shoulders would stiffen when the wind carried the smell of wood smoke. How her hands would twitch every time she passed the stove. How she never, ever touched Matches 7, the cartoon ones in a science textbook. But when she drew, her hands were steady, intentional, like they belonged to someone older. Someone who had lived through 1,000 endings and came back with a pencil instead of a scream. He didn't disturb her while she worked, just watched from the doorway sometimes, leaning on the frame with a mug of black coffee cooling in his grip. In those quiet hours after school, she'd sit cross-legged in the corner of the living room back to the wall, paper spread across the floor like fallen leaves. She didn't hum, didn't blink much, just drew. Lately, the drawings had changed. Less fire, more shadows, human-like ones, always hunched or looming, always faceless. One picture showed a teacher standing tall at a chalkboard, but the mouth had been erased, smeared, into a blur. The words on the board read only, "Speak when spoken to." Micah studied it while she slept. Something about the lines made his stomach knot. It wasn't just fear in those images, it was warning. It was memory. The incident happened on a Thursday. The sun had barely warmed the frost off the school's windows when Arden walked through the front doors, sketchpad hugged to her chest like a shield. She always sat near the back of the class, next to the window, where the light was softest and the noise came filtered through trees. That morning's substitute was Mr. Penley. New, young, eager. The kind of man who carried a clipboard like it was a sword, determined to prove something before understanding anything. The first sign of trouble came during roll call. "Arden Wells?" he called, eyes scanning the list. Silence. A few students exchanged glances. "Miss Wells?" he said again, louder this time. Arden didn't move. Her pencil remained poised above the page, halfway through, sketching the curve of a girl's shoulder. Mr. Penley stepped closer. "I was told you don't talk," he said, forcing a smile. "But that doesn't mean you can't nod, right? Let's try again, Arden Wells." A snicker bubbled from the front row. Arden lowered her pencil. "I don't think ignoring your teachers is going to help anyone," Penley continued, now with edge. "It's basic respect, Miss Wells." Another voice whispered, not loud but clear. "She's a freak." Laughter. Not loud, but sharp. A slice of sound, enough to make her flinch. That's when it happened. Her hands began to tremble. Not visibly, not at first, but her breathing quickened, short and fast, like footsteps trying to outrun something. Penley didn't notice. "You need to acknowledge me," he said. "This class doesn't make exceptions." Arden stood. The chair behind her tipped over and clattered against the floor. For a split second, everything stopped. Her face was pale. Her eyes locked on Himnot in defiance, not in anger, but like she was trying to remember how to stay in her body. Then she bolted. Micah was in the middle of measuring planks in the shed when the school called. They used words like episode and non-compliance and de-escalation protocol. He said nothing, just hung up and drove to the school without changing out of his sawdust-covered flannel. He found her outside, sitting on the curb, arms wrapped around her knees. Her sketchpad was clenched in her hands, but the cover had torn in half. The pages were fluttering, bending, exposed. He didn't speak right away, just sat beside her. After a long minute, she turned and handed him a single sheet. It was different from the others. No fire, no shadow. Just a girl standing in a white void, her mouth sewn shut with black thread. In her chest was a door, and through its cracks, a beast looked out part wolf, part storm. Its eyes were glowing, but it didn't look angry. Just waiting. Micah held the paper like it might crumble in his hands. He looked at her. She looked away. He didn't try to fix it, didn't offer shallow comfort or ask her to explain. He simply folded the drawing and placed it in his coat pocket. "We'll go home," he said quietly. "You're not broken, Arden. You're just armored." That night, she didn't eat. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at her blank sketchpad as if afraid of what might appear if she touched it. Her fingers hovered over the paper, but didn't press down. Micah placed a cup of warm tea beside her elbow, then retreated to the porch. The wind had picked up. The trees moved like whispers. Oars passed. Then, just before midnight, the soft scratch of pencil returned. And with it, something new. The next morning, Micah found her asleep on the living room rug, sketchpad still in hand. The last drawing was different. It showed the same girl with the sewn mouth, but this time, the thread was unraveling. Standing beside her was a dog, half shaded, half light, its head resting against her arm. The stitches were loosening. Not gone, but loosening. Micah knelt beside her and placed a blanket over her shoulders. He looked at the page again and whispered something no one else would hear. "She's not just drawing the dark anymore. She's drawing her way out of it." It was the kind of storm that felt personal. The wind didn't just pass through Red Hollow that evening, it lingered, howling against the window panes like it was searching for a way in. The trees bent under its weight, whispering old things, their branches scratching at the sides of Micah's cabin like fingers. Lightning split the sky in quick, violent bursts, and somewhere behind the hills, thunder cracked with the weight of memory. Inside the shed, Micah barely noticed the first rumbles. He was wrist-deep in oak shavings, smoothing the edge of a cabinet door he'd been meaning to finish for weeks. Rain tapped softly on the tin roof above, growing louder, steadier, until it became a sharp, insistent drumming that drowned out thought. Then came the flicker. The lights blinked once, then held. Micah sighed, set down the sander, and wiped his hands on a rag that smelled like motor oil and sawdust. Through the open shed door, the rain came down in sheets now, white and slanted, like the world itself was being scrubbed clean. He turned toward the cabin just in time to see the porch swing twist on its chain. It swayed once, then slammed against the siding with a hollow bang, and beneath that, so faint he almost missed it, came a sound. Not the storm, not the trees. A whimper. Micah paused. listening harder. There it was again. Low, muffled, fragile, like a child exhaling through tears. He stepped out into the rain, boots crunching on wet gravel, and scanned the dark edge of the house. Lightning lit the yard for a split second, bleaching the world bone white. He crouched, heart beating slow but steady, and peered beneath the porch. 2 eyes looked back. They were glowing faintly in the shadows, golden and wet, ringed with fear. Not human, not wild, dog. Micah's breath caught not because he was afraid, but because something in those eyes didn't belong to just any stray. They held something haunted, something that had seen fire and been changed by it. The German Shepherd was curled tight, spine pressed to the foundation wall, ribs showing through a soaked and matted coat. One paw was bent awkwardly beneath him. No collar, no tags. Just skin, bone, and survival. Micah crouched lower. "Hey there," he murmured. His voice was low but not soft. "Easy, boy." The dog didn't growl, didn't move, just stared. Micah recognized that kind of stillness. The kind that wasn't trust but exhaustion. The kind of stillness that said, "I won't run. I don't have the strength anymore." He stepped back and opened the screen door with a sigh. "Well," he muttered, "ain't this just my luck?" Inside the cabin, Arden sat by the window, knees hugged to her chest, watching the rain trace frantic paths down the glass. Her sketch pad was beside her, untouched for the first time in days. When Micah opened the door, water trailing from his coat and into the entryway, she didn't move. He leaned down, shook off his boots, then called over his shoulder, half out of habit, half out of hope. "Arden, you might want to see this." No response. He didn't expect one, but he left the door open just a crack. The next moment happened so fast, he almost missed it. A blur of movement, quiet but urgent. Arden moved. Not sluggishly. Not like she was being pushed by someone else's routine. She stood, crossed the floor, and when she saw the dog, still crouched beneath the porch, something inside her shifted, like a hinge finally giving way. She didn't hesitate, not for a second. She stepped out into the storm, barefoot on cold wood, and dropped to her knees. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the scene like a photograph burned into the night. The girl, the dog, and the space between them, collapsing. Arden reached out slowly, fingers trembling just once before settling on the shepherd's soaked fur. He didn't flinch, didn't snarl, just leaned into her touch as if it was the first kind hand he'd felt in years. She wrapped her arms around him, not loosely, not cautiously, but with everything she had left. Micah stood in the doorway, water dripping from his beard, watching the two ghosts cling to each other like survivors from the same shipwreck. And in that moment, he understood. This wasn't just a stray. This was her stray. They brought him inside, wrapped in an old towel. Arden carried one end like a child cradling a relic. Micah handled the rest, careful not to jostle the bad leg. He tried to speak once. "We should call the shelter in the morning." But the way Arden looked at him, eyebrows furrowed, jaw set, it shut him right up. She didn't need to say anything. Her body did the talking. "This one stays." Micah laid out blankets by the fireplace, started a low flame, and sat back as Arden knelt beside the dog. She disappeared for a moment, then returned with a ceramic bowl from the kitchen. She filled it with water and slid it forward. The dog sniffed once, drank like he hadn't had clean water in days. Then, slowly, she took a Sharpie from her sketch kit and began writing on the side of the bowl, all capitals, uneven letters, Rook. Micah didn't ask where the name came from. He just nodded, rubbed the back of his neck, and said, "Well, all right then." That night, the wind rattled the windows, but no one stirred. Rook slept at the foot of Arden's door, one ear twitching, body curled into a tight crescent. Arden fell asleep on the rug nearby, hand outstretched, resting against his back. And Micah? He sat alone on the porch long after midnight, cup of coffee gone cold in his hands, thinking not about the rain or the dog, but about the moment Arden stepped into the storm without fear, not to run, but to save something broken. He smiled, shook his head, and whispered into the wind. Storm found storm, didn't it? Micah had seen storms before, violent ones, tender ones, the kind that came through red hollow like cleansing fire. But he had never seen a storm that cracked a person open. Not until that night. Not until she moved. Arden had always drifted through the house like a shadow with edges present, but never settled. She didn't slam doors or scream or cry. She simply didn't respond. Grief had cocooned her into a stillness that frightened even silence. She did not speak. She did not laugh. She did not flinch. And then, the dog. He was curled near the fireplace now, damp fur rising and falling with each slow breath. His bones showed through. His ear had an old scar that sliced through the fur like a forgotten trail. But there was something else, something more alive than fragile. Micah had tossed out a name half in jest, trying to fill the space with anything but the tension that hovered like smoke. "Well," he said, standing over the dog with a hand on his hip. "You're trouble, ain't you?" His voice was easy, rough, but kind. He glanced at Arden, expecting nothing just routine. She turned. For the first time since she'd arrived, Arden looked at him. Not past him, not through him, at him. Then she bent down beside the dog and did something that Micah would remember for the rest of his life, not because it was loud, but because it broke the pattern. She picked up her sketch pad and wrote, "His name is Rook." Micah stared at the page. The letters were blocky, hesitant but determined. She turned the pad toward him like an offering not to ask for permission but to state a fact. Micah blinked, caught somewhere between awe and disbelief. "Rook?" Arden nodded once. It was not a conversation. It was a declaration. And Rook, as if understanding the transaction, shifted slightly and placed his head on her lap. He didn't lick her hand. He didn't beg for affection. He just rested there, as if he had finally found the place where he didn't have to fight. Micah exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Well, all right, kid," he murmured. "Rook it is." But the name wasn't just a name. It fit, somehow. Rook wasn't flashy like knight or fierce like king. A rook was silent, observant, guarding the edge of the board. Sacrificial. Loyal. Micah studied the way Arden sat, now not stiff, not hollow, but anchored. One hand still on Rook's shoulder, her eyes fixed on the fire, but her body no longer locked in some far-off memory. She moved with purpose now. She moved like she had something to protect. Later that night, the storm waned into a hush that hovered just outside the windows. Inside, the cabin had changed only slightly, but Micah felt it in the floorboards, in the breathing. Arden didn't go to her room. Instead, she stayed curled next to Rook, her palm still resting on the rise and fall of his ribs. The fireplace cast long shadows on the wall, shadows that used to scare her. Not anymore. Micah watched from the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, coffee cooling in his hands. He didn't interrupt. Rook shifted, winced slightly, then turned his head just enough to press his muzzle against Arden's side. She didn't flinch. She leaned in. Micah hadn't seen her make eye contact with another living being in months. Not even him. She rarely looked out windows, rarely touched anything. Her body moved like it didn't belong to her anymore. But with Rook, she was different. She was present. He thought about saying something, some half-joke about the dog being the only one who could get through to her, but he let it go. Words felt like breaking glass in moments like this. Instead, he walked over to the fireplace, crouched beside her, and laid another log on the coals. Arden didn't startle, didn't move away. She simply whispered something into Rook's fur. Micah couldn't hear it, but he didn't need to. It was her first sound in days. At midnight, Micah turned off the lights but left the fire burning low. The cabin creaked in familiar ways, settling after the storm. He paused at the doorway of Arden's room. Still empty, he peered back into the living room. She was asleep on the floor, one arm flung across Rook's chest. Her fingers were tangled in his coarse fur like roots, trying to hold earth together. Rook didn't stir, his breathing slow, one ear tilted back as if still listening to ghosts. Micah stared at them, heart heavy with something he didn't have a name for. He whispered softly into the dark, "Keep her, all right?" Outside, the rain stopped. Inside, a girl and a dog shared the kind of silence that heals, not harms. Rook never asked for anything. He didn't whine at the door, didn't bark for food, didn't scratch at windows or pace like so many shelter dogs Micah had seen in his lifetime. No, Rook simply was a quiet sentinel, patient and still, as if he'd been waiting for this life, this house. This girl. Every night, he curled up outside Arden's door. Every morning, he rose when she did. He never looked for commands. He didn't need them. And she never spoke. But somehow, they understood each other in a language no one else could hear. Micah noticed it first in the shift of footsteps. There had always been a stillness to Arden that made the walls achy, a kind of suspended emptiness, like something waiting to fall. But now, her movements were deliberate. Not bold, not loud, but purposeful. When she walked, it was never alone. Rook's paws padded beside her, like a living shadow. They didn't make eye contact often. They didn't need to. Their bond wasn't loud, it was rooted. By the end of the week, her drawings changed. Micah discovered them the way he always did, by accident. A sheet had slipped from her sketch pad onto the kitchen table. He meant to move it, to respect her space, but he saw it. No fire. No crumbling walls or broken glass. No black trees with bleeding branches. Instead, there was Arden, a version of her, any quiet, barefoot, sitting cross-legged in a field that was only half sketched. Beside her was Rook. Not stylized, not mythic. Just him. Every line of his scarred ear, the faint patch of missing fur near his ribs, the downward tilt of his eyes that always made him look like he knew sorrow too well. There were dozens of them. A girl and a dog. A girl holding a leash she never pulled. A dog sitting in the rain beside her while she drew on the sidewalk. A pair of silhouettes beneath a tree without leaves, but the sky above was soft gray, not black. Micah swallowed hard. This wasn't just art. This was memory forming in real time. This was healing made visible. One morning, Micah found Arden curled against Rook on the back porch, wrapped in a quilt she had brought out herself. The sun hadn't even risen, but she was awake, sketching quietly while Rook's head rested on her knee. He didn't want to disturb it, didn't want to intrude on the sacred stillness of that hour. But she looked up and for the briefest moment, she smiled. It wasn't wide, it wasn't certain, but it was real. A corner of her mouth tilted upward, a light just behind her eyes. It flickered like a candle in wind, but refused to go out. Micah tipped his mug toward her, silent. She nodded once, then returned to her drawing. Red Hollow was a small town, and gossip traveled like pollen on spring wind. People whispered about the dog, about the girl, about the man who had taken them both in, broken things, finding shelter beneath the same roof. At the grocery store, Mrs. Heller leaned over the counter and said, "That dog of yours, there's something special about him. The way he looks at her like he understands more than most people do." Micah didn't know how to respond, because it was true. It wasn't just that Rook walked beside Arden. It was how he adjusted his gait to match hers, how he stepped slightly in front when they neared a group of kids, how he nudged her elbow when her breathing changed near crowds, how he waited outside the school building until the final bell rang, never tied, never called, and yet always exactly where she needed him. He'd become her compass. And maybe she was his. The most astonishing change wasn't in her movement or her routine. It was in the walls of her room. Micah rarely entered. He'd given her that space as sacred. But one day, while fixing the thermostat, he knocked gently and peeked in. And there they were, pages, dozens of them, tacked onto the walls like paper windows into her heart. A girl and a dog, sometimes in color, sometimes in charcoal, but always together, always connected. In one, Rook stood in front of Arden like a shield, his ears pulled back, his teeth bared at an unseen threat. In another, Arden leaned on his shoulder, asleep. Micah felt the breath catch in his chest. This wasn't imagination. This was trust. This was a pact. That night, a wind rolled through Red Hollow, rustling the leaves in restless whispers. Micah sat on the porch with his third cup of coffee, watching Rook do his usual patrol-nothing official, just the slow, measured pacing of a creature who had once known danger and now couldn't forget the rhythm of vigilance. Micah wondered what Rook had seen. What kind of handler had trained him? What kind of war had left its imprint on those eyes? He didn't have answers. But as Arden stepped onto the porch and wordlessly slid down beside Rook, laying her hand over his chest, he knew this much. They had found each other in the debris. And sometimes, that was enough. Sometimes, you didn't need to speak to make a promise. You just had to stay. There was something sacred about the trail behind the house. It wasn't marked on any map, just an old hunting path, half swallowed by moss and pine needles, winding between black oaks and whispering firs. Most of Red Hollow forgot it was there, but Arden hadn't. And neither had Rook. They walked it every afternoon, just the two of them. No leash, no sound but wind and footfall. Rook stayed close, always to her left, always a half step behind, not crowding, not leading, watching. Micah had noticed it weeks ago. The way Rook scanned the tree line, the way he stopped at bends in the path and looked, not like a pet, but like a sentinel. There was a precision to him that didn't come from instinct. It came from training, and Micah had seen that before. That day, the woods were thick with spring, breath-wet leaves, distant thunder. The hush that falls before a storm makes up its mind. Arden walked ahead, sketchbook clutched to her chest. Rook trotted beside her, his tail low, ears pivoting constantly like twin antennas. Micah followed at a distance, not to hover, just enough to keep them in sight. He didn't want to interrupt this version of Ardenthe, one who moved with rhythm, not recoil. She paused sometimes to kneel in the dirt, run her fingers across tree bark, pick up a stone, or press her hand into mud like she was taking the forest's pulse. Rook never broke stride, except once, and that was enough. The bark came from nowhere, a sharp, erratic snarl. Then the thudding of paws. A blur of fur tore through the underbrush. A loose dog, lean and tan, ribs showing, eyes wild with either fear or fury. No collar, no warning. It bolted straight toward Arden. She froze, not just still, but locked, like her entire body had shut down. Micah's lungs stalled. His foot slipped in wet earth, but he didn't have time to shout. Rook moved first. Not with panic, with precision. He stepped in front of Arden so fast the motion barely registered. A low growl rumbled from his chest knot high. Not aggressive, but steady and grounded, like thunder rolling underfoot. The other dog lunged barking, teeth bared. Rook didn't bark back. He pivoted, blocked, and snapped not to bite, but to warn. Not an inch of him flinched. He angled his body between Arden and the threat, head lowered, hackles half raised in a way that said, "You will not pass." The wild dog hesitated, growled again. Rook stood his ground. Not once did he lunge. Not once did he escalate. He didn't need to. His body said everything. And eventually, the dog backed down, its breath ragged, eyes wary. It limped away into the trees. Rook didn't chase. He waited until he could no longer hear the other animal's breath. Waited until Arden's shoulders, trembling, began to lower. Waited until Micah reached them. Arden collapsed to her knees. Not in fear but release. She pressed her face against Rook's shoulder, her fingers twisting into the fur at his neck. No words, just breath, just contact. Micah crouched beside them, heart still pounding. Rook glanced back at him, eyes level, calm. And something clicked. Micah had seen that look before. Not in family dogs, not in pets, but in working K9S. In Iraq, he'd once watched a handler take a bullet during a roadside stop, and the dog had shielded the wounded soldier's body for 4 hours before help arrived. Never barked, never moved, just watched, just waited. That's what Rook was doing now. Watching, waiting. Not for thanks, not for praise. Just making sure the perimeter was clear. Micah whispered, "You've done this before, haven't you?" Rook didn't respond, but his gaze lingered on the trail where the other dog had vanished until he was sure it was over. Later that evening, Micah sat on the porch with Rook at his feet, Arden inside. A file folder rested on Micah's lap, dusty, creased, full of old Army K9 records he hadn't looked at in years. He flipped through the pages absently. Search and rescue, narcotics, explosives, combat deployment, retired at 8, rehomed, sometimes returned, sometimes put down. Micah glanced at Rook, scar above the eyebrow, limp in his right hind leg when it rained. Trained eyes, trauma silence. He'd seen it before. But the way Rook had reacted not just to danger, but to Arden was something different. Protective, yes, but attuned. Like he wasn't just guarding her, he was mirroring her. Micah leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing toward the tree line. "Who were you before us, Rook?" Rook didn't move, didn't blink, just watched. In Arden's room, a new drawing took shape. Rook, mid-step, head turned toward something unseen, eyes locked on the edge of the page. Beside him Arden, not kite-smiling, but standing, and above them, faintly sketched in pencil, a shadow dog, larger, ghost-like, watching from the woods. The title at the bottom of the page, "He Sees What I Can't." It began with the door. Not a bark, not a whine, just a sound-soft claws tapping wood. Once, twice then, silence. Micah heard it in the early hours, the dead gray pocket of night when even the wind forgets to stir. He was used to the quiet. After the fire, it lived in their house like a tenant no one dared evict. But that night, it was a different kind of quiet, tense, like the air had braced itself. He stepped into the hallway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. The soft knock came again from Arden's room. Then he heard the sound that made his stomach clench, a muffled, broken sob. Inside, the room was dark, but alive with movement. Arden twisted in her sleep, trapped in some invisible snare. Her breath came in shallow gasps, lips parted but no scream, escaping just that same helpless sound of someone trying not to wake up. Rook stood beside Bill, still, alert, waiting. Micah watched as the dog reached forward not abruptly, but gently, and placed a single paw on the blanket near her hip. Then, without hesitation, Rook let out the softest huff, a kind of grounded exhale, not loud enough to startle, just present, real. And Arden stilled, like the tether holding her to the nightmare had snapped. Her breath calmed. Her hand slid, barely conscious, across the mattress, until it found fur, fingers tangled in it, as if she'd done it 1,000 times. And then she slept. No screams, no running, just peace. Micah didn't move, didn't speak, because somehow he knew interrupting this meant tearing open something delicate. Instead, he stepped back into the hallway and sat outside her door, eyes fixed on the sliver of golden lamplight stretching across the floor like a lifeline. The next morning, he found them the same way. Rook curled up at the foot of her bed. Arden, blanket kicked off, hands still resting on his back. Her expression not blank, not numb, just rested. He stood in the doorway for a long while, then quietly stepped away. There was nothing he could have offered her that Rook hadn't already given. It didn't happen every night, but often enough to become a rhythm. Micah began to notice the signs. Sometimes around midnight, Rook would rise from the foot of his bed, tail low but focused, and pad silently down the hall. The nightmares didn't vanish, but they shifted. Arden stopped waking up in panic. No more trembling hands at breakfast. No more staring out the window like she was trapped behind glass. Instead, she started drawing in the mornings. Always the same two figures, a girl and her dog, and always connected a leash between them. But it wasn't a leash of control. It was love. One morning, Micah found a folded paper on the kitchen table. One of Arden's drawings. Charcoal on cream. In it, a small girl stood barefoot on a dark hill, storm clouds swirling behind her. Her shoulders were hunched, like she'd been weathered by 1,000 rains. Beside her, a dog stood tall, broad-chested, steady eyes. Between them, a line, taut but never pulled. At the bottom, in Arden's careful, blocky handwriting, "He holds me to the earth." Micah sat down hard in the kitchen chair. He hadn't cried in years, not when they lost Eliza, not even at the funeral. He couldn't afford to. Someone had to be the anchor. But this broke something loose, because he realized the thing he'd been failing to give her wasn't a solution. It was presence. And somehow, a dog that came out of a storm had known exactly what she needed. Not words, not therapy, just not being alone when it hurt. Later that week, Micah found himself in the general store downtown, holding a leather leash in his hands. It was dark brown, hand-stitched, with a brass clasp. Nothing fancy, but it felt right. Not because Rook needed it. He obeyed without command, stayed by Arden's side like he was stitched to her shadow. But Micah had begun to understand. The leash wasn't for control. It was a ritual, a way of saying, "You belong. I walk with you. I will not let you drift." That evening, Micah handed Arden the leash without a word. She looked at it, then looked at him. New questions. Just understanding. She knelt, clipped it gently to Rook's collar, and the dog didn't even blink. They walked the trail together that night. Arden, Rook, and Micah a few steps behind. At one point, she stopped and turned back, held up the leash like a ribbon caught in wind. Then she smiled a real one. Small, crooked, but real. Micah felt the weight of 100 unsaid things lift, just a little, and for the first time, he whispered to the trees, "Maybe she's coming back." It started with yellow. Not the faint, washed-out kind that clings to sick-room curtains, but real yellow sunflower yellow. Bold, sure of itself. Micah spotted it as he passed the doorway to the sunroom one late afternoon, arms full of laundry. He paused mid-step. There, spread across Arden's easel and dripping slightly onto the wooden floor, was a canvas unlike any she'd ever painted. No black, no ash, no screaming skies or hollow-eyed children, just light. The center of the painting glowed with gold and amber and soft brushed greens that looked like memory if memory had roots. A girl stood barefoot, in a sunlit field hair windblown, shoulders relaxed. She wasn't faceless like the others Arden used to draw. This one had eyes, bright ones. Beside her, a German shepherd, larger than life. Muscles tensed like sculpture, but not aggressive. Protective, present, anchored. Micah set the laundry basket down without a sound. He didn't dare speak. Not yet. Instead, he just looked. At first, it seemed like any other image from Arden's hand, beautiful in its restraint, composed in its silence. But then his gaze caught something different. The colors weren't just layered, they were intertwined. The girl's shadow melted into the dog's flank. The dog's ear caught a glint of the same gold that touched her cheek. They weren't two subjects in the painting. They were one story. Micah exhaled slowly. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. Arden didn't notice him until she stepped back, paintbrush still clutched in her fingers. She turned, spotted him in the doorway, and froze. But this time, unlike before, she didn't flinch like a deer caught in headlights. She didn't hide the canvas. She didn't shrink away. She just waited. Micah stepped inside, his voice gentle and unsure. Like stepping onto ice you're not sure will hold. "Is that us?" Arden's gaze held his for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. Micah looked back at the painting. This wasn't just art. It was a shift. The kind that sneaks up behind you and changes the temperature of the whole room. Something was blooming inside her. Something brave. He stepped closer, scanning the corners of the image. In every one of Arden's previous pieces, even the calm ones, there had always been something brocana, distant fire, a bleeding crack, a window that led nowhere. But here, the only thing in the corners was sky. Endless, open. He swallowed thickly. "She's coming back," he whispered. Not to Arden, just to the room, just to the part of himself that had waited so long to say it. Arden heard anyway. She turned her head and looked down at Rook, who was curled at her feet like a sentinel. Then, without warning, she reached into her sketchbook and pulled out a folded paper. Wordlessly, she handed it to Micah. He unfolded it. Another drawing. Less finished. Roar. But powerful in a different way. It showed the same girl and dog, but this time they were facing away, staring into a forest at dusk. The trees were painted in strange colors, deep blues, violet fog, dark red leaves, but there was no menace in it. Just mystery. At the bottom, she had written in small, uneven block letters, "We're not afraid of what comes next." Micah felt something twist behind his ribs. He looked up to say something, ending that Arden had already gone to rinse her brushes. The moment was done. But it had been real, and real moments were rare currency in the house they lived in. That night, when Micah sat alone at the kitchen table, he stared at the folded paper again. He could still feel the warmth of the sun in that painted field. Still see how the shadows didn't threaten but simply existed, softer, less jagged. It occurred to him that grief wasn't always a storm. Sometimes it was a drought-long stretches of nothing, cracked ground and empty clouds. But now, in Arden's new colors, He saw signs of rain, of green returning, of roots deepening. He thought of Eliza, of her laugh, bright and sudden, of how she used to sit on this very porch and say, "Don't rush healing. It blooms like stubborn flowers when it's ready." Micah closed his eyes. Somewhere inside him, something exhaled. Rook padded into the room a while later, toenails clicking softly on wood. He didn't beg for food, didn't nudge a hand. He simply walked to the end of the table, sat down, and met Micah's gaze. Still, calm, knowing. Micah leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. "She's painting again," he murmured. And not just pain. Rook didn't move. Micah smiled, slow and tired. "You did that, didn't you?" Silence answered. But it didn't feel empty. It felt like agreement. Later, when Arden walked in to refill her glass, she paused in the doorway. Micah didn't speak, just raised the drawing she'd given him and tapped the corner. Then gently he said, "I believe you. About the field. About him." Arden didn't reply, but her eyes flicked to Rook, then to Micah, and for just a second, she nodded. Micah watched her disappear down the hall, the drawing still in his hands. And though the house still echoed with ghosts, there were new colors on the walls now. The afternoon air had that sticky quality spring sometimes wears like a threat-worm, but twitching with thunder that hadn't yet arrived. Micah was inside, sanding a cabinet door. Arden and Rook were in the field behind the house, tracing the worn edges of the property line where the tall grass met the rusted fence that hadn't been straight in years. She walked in slow loops, now not aimless like before, but curious, tethered to something. Or someone. Rook padded close beside her, step for step, ears relaxed but alert. She didn't carry a sketchbook today. She didn't need to. The field had colors. Her memory was just starting to remember how to trust again. Then came the voice. Sharp, sour, a scratch on a clean surface. Well, if it ain't the mute in her little science experiment. Arden stopped mid-step. Rook froze beside her. The man stood by the corner of the fence, one boot up on the lowest wire, chewing something invisible between his teeth. Greasy ball cap, Marlboro shirt, face like gravel that never healed right. Colby Barnes. Micah had warned her to keep her distance. But warnings don't mean much when hatred finds you first. Didn't know Micah was running a shelter for strays now, Colby sneered. That mutt yours? Or just another thing you don't talk about? Arden didn't move, didn't blink. Rook didn't growl yet, but his shoulders shifted, his stance lowered by a fraction. A whisper of tension moved through his body like a question looking for the right answer. Colby squinted, like her silence offended him more than a scream would have. "Cat got your tongue, or you just broken up there in the head," he barked, louder this time, stepping off the fence. "Ain't normal. Kid like you, dog like that." He reached into his back pocket, pulled out something small and round. A rock. Tossed it lazily in one hand. Then, without warning, threw it. Hard. It cracked through the air like a whip, meant for nothing but punishment. Rook moved first. He stepped in front of Arden so fast, the wind lagged behind him. The rock hit his flank not hard enough to wound, but enough to spark. Rook's growl uncoiled from his chest like something ancient. Low, visceral, deadly. Colby actually stumbled back. "What the hell kind of dog is that?" he spat, voice thinner now, though he tried to sound amused. "Damn mutt's got screws loose." Rook took one step forward. That was all. And it was enough. Arden moved. Not away. Toward Rook. She stepped beside him and placed a hand on his back. No words. Just pressure. The kind of touch that says, "Not here, not like this." Rook obeyed. That was the part that made Colby pause. Not the growl. Not the step. But the fact that this dog who looked like he'd eat a man whole stood down with nothing more than a girl's hand on his fur. Colby blinked, shoved his cap lower, and scoffed. "Y'all deserve each other." Then he walked off, muttering, but not looking back. When he was gone, the silence returned. But it wasn't empty. It pulsed with aftermath. Arden stood there for a moment, hand still on Rook's shoulder. Her breath was steady, but something deep in her chest rattled like a locked door. Rook turned his head slightly, checking her. She nodded once, then bent down not to speak, not to cry, but to wrap her arms around his neck. It wasn't a hug for comfort. It was a vow. The wind picked up just enough to rustle the grass. She didn't notice. Rook didn't flinch. They just stood like that girl and dog pressed together, backlit by the last of the sun. Micah saw it from the window, didn't interrupt, didn't step outside, just watched, and thought, not for the first time, that maybe Rook had come out of that storm not just to be saved, but to protect something sacred, even from things that didn't have claws. That night, Arden drew again. This time, it wasn't a field, it was a fence, crooked, and on the other side of it, a shadow with no face. But the girl in the picture didn't run. She stood, hand resting on the back of a tall dog who looked like he'd been carved from loyalty and bone, and beneath them, in careful block letters, "Not everything broken needs to be fixed. Some things just need to be left alone." Micah first noticed the way Arden held her pencil like it might break in her grip. She'd always drawn with a kind of reverence lines, light but certain, like she trusted the paper not to betray her. But now her strokes were too heavy, hesitant, and there was a tear in the corner of the sketch pad, like someone had yanked it shut too hard. "Rough day?" he asked gently, crouching beside the kitchen table. She didn't answer, but Rook, lying beneath her chair, lifted his head. His eyes locked with Micah's for half a second, long enough to say something was wrong. Again, it had started small, as these things always do. A scribble across one of her drawings. Thick black Sharpie slashes over what had been a quiet field in a girl's outline. The words "weirdo dog freak" scratched deep into the page. Micah had found it in the trash when taking it out, the edges of the paper still trembling from how violently it had been torn out. He didn't mention it, neither did she, but the next day, her locker wouldn't open. Not because it was jammed, but because someone had jammed something into the lock. Chewed gum, paper clips twisted like wire, pencil leads snapped and wedged like punishment. She sat on the hallway floor, knees tucked to her chest as the world moved past her, loud and fast and cruel. Nobody helped. No one even slowed down. Only when the bell rang did she quietly walk away. Then the pencil started breaking. Every day snapped clean through. She kept her sketchbook closer, her eyes lower, her voice sealed. But she didn't stop drawing. Not completely. Not yet. Micah tried calling the school. Left messages. Got polite silence in return. They said there were no confirmed incidents. Said her silence made it hard to verify. Said maybe it was just miscommunication. He almost drove there and shook the truth out of someone. But Arden wouldn't let him. She wrote in her small block letters, "It's just noise. I can draw new pages." But Micah saw it. So did Rook. The slow, inward collapse. The way she jumped at sudden noises now. The flinch when a locker slammed too hard. The fact that her shoes never left the floor in class, like lifting her feet, might make her disappear completely. And then came the day Rook refused to leave. Micah pulled into the school parking lot like always. Engine still humming. Arden stood beside the building entrance. Alone. Shoulders hunched. Sketchbook clutched tight. Rook was supposed to stay in the truck bed, but he jumped down, paced once, then trotted toward her. Not rushed, just deliberate. Like he'd made a decision and wasn't going to argue about it. Micah called him back. Rook didn't listen. He stood at Arden's side like a statue carved from storm clouds. Arden didn't smile, but her hand dropped automatically, settling on his back. And the tension in her shoulders released. A little. Micah stepped out of the truck. "Rook," he said firmly. "Truck, now." Rook didn't move. Instead, his ears flicked once back toward the school. Micah followed his gaze. There, standing half-hidden behind the gym doors, was Colby Barnes, leering, tapping something against his palm, probably a snapped pencil or a pocket knife or whatever else made him feel taller than he was. When he saw Micah watching, Colby spat to the side and slipped away. Rook growled, so low it was more a presence than a sound. Micah didn't say anything. He opened the passenger door. Arden climbed in, still holding Rook's fur. She didn't let go until the truck was moving. That night, Rook wouldn't leave her room. He lay just inside the door, back to the wall, eyes never closing fully. Micah stood in the hallway for a moment, watching the two of them. Arden curled up on her side, back to the window. Rook facing the door, still as stone. Not a pet, not a watchdog, a guardian. Micah closed the door quietly. He didn't sleep well. Neither did Rook. The next morning, there was a message on the kitchen table. Not a drawing this time. Just blocked letters on a ripped-out notebook page. "I'm not scared, but I need him." Below it, a sketch of Rookhead turned back, watching her. Micah called the school again. This time, he didn't leave a message. He asked for a meeting. They told him it would be reviewed. He hung up before they could finish, then looked at Rook, and for the first time, said out loud what had been growing in his gut like mold. "That dog's not just smart. He's trained." Rook met his eyes, didn't blink, didn't deny it. Micah exhaled. "Who were you, boy?" The leash on the hook never got touched that day, because Rook didn't need one anymore. Where Arden went, he went, and no one was going to hurt her again. The sky was still soft with afternoon haze when the scream came from behind the art building. It wasn't Arden. It was Jenny Alvarez, the girl who always wore glitter on her eyelids and hated mud. She dropped her smoothie and clutched her phone like a weapon. "Oh my God, somebody, she's bleeding." Micah's phone buzzed minutes later. The school secretary's voice was thin and tight. "Mr. Brightwell, there's been an incident with Rook." He didn't wait for details. The gravel behind the school dumpsters was still wet from rain. A small puddle had formed near the runoff pipe, cloudy red now, flecked with hair. Rook lay low, sides heaving, one paw tucked under like he was hiding it from the world. Blood soaked through the fur along his ribs, and his back leg dragged slightly as he lifted his head to see Micah. He didn't whine, didn't cry, just blinked slowly, like he was sorry for being found like this. Micah knelt beside him, heart in his throat. "Easy, boy. I got you. I got you." Rook leaned in, just enough for his muzzle to brush against Micah's chest. Then his eyes closed. The vet said it wasn't life-threatening, but it was deliberate. A jagged cut near the flank. Not an accident, not a scrape, a slice, likely from a box cutter or sharp metal edge. It would scar, but he'd live. When Arden arrived silent, pale, fists clenched at her Sadeshi, didn't go to the waiting room, didn't speak to the nurse. She walked straight into the recovery room like she belonged there. Micah didn't stop her. Neither did the vet. Inside, Rook's body rose and fell gently beneath a thermal blanket. He turned his head as soon as he heard her. Only then did Arden move. Not fast, not slow. Like gravity had changed, and she decided to obey it. She sank to her knees beside him, laid her hand gently on the uninjured part of his fur. Her eyes were dry, but her fingers trembled. Rook licked her palm once. Micah watched from the doorway, fists in his coat pockets, jaw tight. He didn't ask who did it, didn't need to. That night, she didn't eat dinner, didn't speak, just sat, cross-legged on the floor of her room, with a new sheet of drawing paper and a box of charcoal. She worked in silence. Micah passed by the doorway once, twice. On the third time, she looked up and held the picture out to him. It wasn't subtle. A girl tall, powerful, barefoot in a storm stood in the center of a field. Her eyes burned with something ancient. One hand clutched a leash made of crackling bolts, stretched like a whip in the air. Lightning burst from her other hand, arcing toward a cluster of shadows cowering at the edge of the page. Beside her, a dog made of stormlight, not wounded, not weak, unleashed. Micah stared at it for a long moment. "You don't want me to take this to the principal, do you?" he asked. She shook her head once, then pointed at the corner of the page where she'd written, "This is what I could do, M." Rook came home the next afternoon, drowsy from sedatives, but tail-thumping once when he saw Arden. He limped slightly, but he stood on his own. Micah helped set up blankets beside Arden's bed. She refused to sleep without him in the room. For the first time since he'd arrived, Rook made a sound in the middle of the night. A low, rumbling woof-knot pain. Not fear, just presence. Arden stirred, reached out. Her fingers found his ear. Neither of them moved again. 2 days later, Micah found a rock on their porch. It had the word "Stay Home" scratched into it with a nail. He didn't tell Arden. He didn't need to. She'd already started a new drawing. This time, the girl and the dog stood on a cliff. The town was beneath them, tiny and powerless. And they weren't angry. They were watching. In the quiet hours after midnight, Micah stood in the kitchen holding Rook's old Kalarth, one the vet had cut off with scissors when treating the wound. Something clinked inside the lining. A hidden tag, half worn, tarnished, but one word still visible. K9 to 17. Micah stared at it, heart tightening. This wasn't just a dog. This was someone's partner. Someone who'd been trained to serve, to guard, to take the pain so another didn't have to. Someone had thrown that away, and now Arden had picked him up, held him close, and wasn't letting go. Micah stood at the screen door, arms crossed, the scent of fried dough and fresh sawdust drifting in from the town square. "You know, they've got those caramel apples you like," he said gently, tilting his head toward the soft clang of distant rides. "Probably $2 overpriced, but worth it." Inside, Arden was seated on the floor of the den, bent over a strip of fabric. She didn't look up, but her hands were moving threading a needle, careful and slow. Beside her, Rook lay stretched out like a shadow come to rest, one ear flicking lazily at the sound of her heartbeat. Micah tried again. "It's been a tough few weeks. You could use some air. It's not about the fare. It's about seeing people again, letting them see you." That made her pause. Arden looked up, not at him, but at Rook. Then she tied the last knot and smiled just a flicker as she held up two hand-stitched bandanas, one in sunflower gold, the other navy blue, with tiny white comets painted near the edges. They walked in just after sunset, when the air was still warm, but the light had softened into that amber hush that makes people linger. Rook trotted proudly at her side, bandana fluttering like a flag of defiance. Arden wore hers like a scout might wear a badge, just visible above the collar of her hoodie. The matching pattern made people look twice, not in pity this time, in awe, because the girl they'd once whispered about, the one who didn't speak, didn't wave, didn't blink when you said hello, was here now, in color, and smiling, just barely, just once. But it bloomed like spring finally breaking through winter. Micah bought her cotton candy. She didn't eat it all, but she let it stick to her fingertips, and she fed tufts to Rook when no one was looking. At the ring toss booth, a boy from her old class handed her a red ring and said, "You should try." She stared at it, then handed it to Micah. He missed all three tries, and Arden rolled her eyes so dramatically that the boy actually laughed. "She's got attitude," he said. Micah grinned. "Yeah, it's coming back." Later, they passed a small chalk art station for kids. Arden slowed. She hesitated for just a breath, then stepped forward. Without a word, she knelt and picked up a piece of green chalk. Rook lay down beside her, alert but content, as if he knew his job right now was simply to be still. In 3 minutes, she had drawn a single image. A girl, holding the leash of a great dog knot, a real one, but one made of stars. They were standing on a hill, watching a sky full of comets fall behind them. People started gathering. A few clapped. Arden didn't look up, but her hand stayed on Rook's neck, and her smile, this time, lasted longer than a heartbeat. They passed the Ferris wheel on the way out. Arden paused, tilting her head at the moving lights. Micah nudged her gently. "We could try it. Just us two." She turned, and then, surprisingly, she shook her head. Instead, she pointed toward the carousel. A small one, wooden, old, with faded gold trim and chipped horses. But soft music played. Real piano, not a recording. Micah blinked. "You want to ride that?" She nodded. So they did. She chose the white horse with the cracked saddle. He stood beside her, hand on the rail, just in case. Rook waited patiently at the fence, eyes tracking every loop. As the carousel turned, and the lights painted soft circles on Arden's face, Micah saw something he hadn't dared hope for yet. Peace. Not the kind that's silent and heavy, but the kind that hums inside the chest. Alive, gentle, earned. As they left, a woman at the fair gate stopped them. "Is that your dog?" she asked Arden, crouching down with curiosity. Arden hesitated. Then she knelt beside Rook, one hand on his chest. She didn't speak. Didn't need to. The woman smiled. "He's beautiful. Loyal, too, from the looks of it." Micah stepped in. "He's got a name." "Oh?" Arden pulled a small card from her hoodie pocket and handed it over. "Rook." The woman blinked, then smiled wider. "Like the chess piece?" Micah nodded. "Exactly. Quiet, cornered, but always protecting the king." Arden's eyes sparkled, and for the first time in public, she laughed. The air was sweet with the scent of lemons and warm sugar. Children's laughter floated from the bounce house behind the library lawn. Arden stood patiently near a folding table draped in yellow gingham, waiting behind two toddlers holding sticky dollar bills. Rook sat close beside her, alert but calm, his sunflower bandana now flecked with grass stains and chalk dust. It had been a good day. A soft, golden kind of day. Until, didn't think mutts were allowed here, a voice sneered. Arden's shoulders stiffened. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Colby Barnes. He sauntered toward them with the bored swagger of someone who'd never been told no and didn't believe he ever would be. His denim jacket was too big for summer, his smirk even bigger. Rook stood now quietly, firmly placing himself between Arden and the approaching threat. "Well, look at that," Colby jeered, circling them. "Still playing the mute game? Cute." "Oh?" His boot kicked up gravel as he walked a slow arc. No one nearby seemed to notice. Parents were watching their kids. The girl at the lemonade stand was bent over a tipped cup. Only Arden, Rook, and Colby existed in this frozen sliver of time. "I heard your mutt sleeps outside your door," he muttered. "What is he, your guard dog now?" No response. Just Arden's hand, tightening slightly on Rook's collar. And then so fast it barely made sense, Colby lunged. His foot swung in a cruel low arc and landed hard in Rook's ribs. The sound Rook made wasn't a bark. It was a broken yelp, sharp and animal and awful, like something torn loose. He stumbled back, legs buckling for a heartbeat. And that's when Arden moved. Not like before when she hesitated, not like the Arden of silence. She dropped to her knees so fast she scraped them on the gravel, arms immediately around Rook, eyes wide, panicked, alive. Her hands fluttered over his side, checking, pleading silently. Her breath came in short, sharp bursts. She didn't cry. She didn't scream, but her whole body shook. Rook whined softly and nudged his nose against her wrist, trying to reassure her. Blood. Just a smear, bright and raw, under his fur. Micah, from across the yard, heard the commotion and was running now. Colby was already walking away, smug and casual. Arden didn't see him. She saw only Rook, her fingers pressed to his fur, trembling. She leaned her forehead against his and mouthed something Micah couldn't hear. But later, when he asked, she wrote it on a slip of paper left on the kitchen table. "He hurt my voice." Not Rook, her. Because for the first time in months, Arden had found something louder than the silence, and someone had tried to kick it away. That night, the bandana came off. Arden washed it by hand, slow and gentle, like it was something sacred. She folded it neatly and laid it beside Rook's bed. Then she didn't leave him. She curled beside him on the floor, her arm across his ribs like a promise she couldn't speak. Micah watched from the doorway. He didn't say a word, but as he turned off the light, he whispered into the dark, "He's not just a dog anymore, is he?" Sunday came with a hush after the storm. The town buzzed with unfinished stories. Parents traded murmurs over fences. Teens replayed grainy clips on their phones. And in Red Hollow's worn heartbeat, something had shifted. Because someone had heard her speak. Not whisper, not write, not cry, but speak with the fire of something ancient and breaking free. It happened not even 30 seconds after Colby's boot struck Rook. Rook had staggered, yelped. Arden had dropped beside him. Micah had rushed over and shoved Colby back with nothing but a look on of those looks only single fathers who've buried their own softness could wield. And then Colby smirked again. Like none of it mattered. Like he hadn't just struck the one thing keeping a girl from unraveling. He turned back with that same laugh, that hollow, mean laugh that tried to turn pain into something invisible. But this time he didn't get to walk away. Because from the ground, still on her knees, her hand still pressed to Rook's ribs, Arden stood. Not all the way, but enough. Enough for her shadow to stretch long beside her dog. And she said it. Not in a whisper, not in a breath, but in a voice the whole fairground heard. "Don't you ever touch him again." 7 words. 7 thunderbolts. Her voice cracked, but it rose like something sacred. Hoarse from disuse, heavy from months of silence. Raw but alive, and it stopped everything. The carousel music stalled in the air. The girl at the lemonade stand dropped her pitcher. A baby stopped crying mid-wail. Colby froze half-turn, half-smirk like a puppet whose strings had snapped. Micah didn't move, didn't blink, because he knew. He knew what it meant for those words to exist in the world now. And the people closest? They stared. At Arden, at the girl who hadn't spoken in 11 months. And then the first phone came out. Then another. And another. Someone whispered, "Did she just?" Someone else, "Record that. Record that." The clip was 12 seconds long. The audio was shaky. The video grainy. The wind dragging against the mic. But the words were clear. And that night, as Arden lay curled beside Rook, one hand on his chest, his slow breath syncing with hers, the world outside their house spun. By dawn, the video had been reposted 300 times. The caption changed from user to user. She finally spoke. The girl and the dog. 7 words. One town shaken. The next morning, Arden didn't look at the screen. She didn't need to, because the power of what she'd said wasn't in who heard it. It was in who it was for. It was for Rook. It was for the night terrors he'd pulled her from, for the bandana now folded under his bed, for the ribs that rose and fell in sleep still bruised, still tender. It was for the loyalty that had never once asked for anything in return. Her voice came back not for herself, but for him. Some moments rewrite everything. Some words tear holes in old truths. And in that fairground echo, as her voice flew through cell towers and whispers and headlines, the girl who didn't speak had become the girl who defended, not just with fists, not with fury, but with something far more terrifying: conviction. It took less than 48 hours for the clip to leave Red Hollow. By the third morning, it was on Good Morning America. A grainy video of a small-town fair, a dog, a girl, and 7 words that landed like a thunderclap across the country. Don't you ever touch him again. It wasn't just what she said. It was how she said it. The cracked defiance. The breaking of silence. The way her hand never left the dog's side. People watched it over coffee, on buses, in classrooms. Veterans reposted it with captions like, "That dog's trained. That girl's got fire." Therapists shared it with commentary about trauma and reclamation. Even a rescue foundation clipped it into a short, "The voice of healing isn't always loud until it is." And the inboxes began to flood. Micah didn't let Arden see most of them. She didn't ask, but he read them, quietly, night after night. One from a mother in Ohio whose daughter hadn't spoken in a year. One from a former K-9 officer who said, "That dog didn't flinch. He took the hit and stayed grounded. He knew who to protect." One from a boy in Michigan who had been kicked for stuttering. "She made me feel brave," he wrote. "Can you tell her thank you?" Micah cried. Just once, alone in the kitchen at 2:37 a.m., phone in hand, coffee cold, because for the first time in a long time, the weight in their house felt lighter. But with the light came shadow. 3 days after the video went viral, the school board called a meeting. Micah arrived in jeans, a flannel, and a face carved from granite. Arden stayed home. Rook stayed beside her. The letter had been curt. "Mr. Micah Rowan, we regret to inform you that a formal complaint has been filed by Mr. Plaint, Conrad Barnes, regarding the incident involving his son, Colby Barnes, at the spring fair. Allegation: emotional distress caused by verbal aggression and defamation in a public setting, leading to psychological harm to a minor." Micah had stared at the printed words until they blurred. Psychological harm? His daughter hadn't spoken for 11 months. His daughter had bled ink into silence, every scream buried in a sketchbook. His daughter had finally said 7 words, and this man had the audacity to call it harm. At the boardroom, he sat across from Mr. Barnes Colby's father, who wore a crisp suit, a smug expression, and the cologne of money. His voice oozed concern, like syrup poured over a rotting wound. "It's about accountability," he said to the board. "My son's reputation has been destroyed by that video. It's everywhere. Kids call him a monster. The girl humiliated him in public." Then, with a bitter twist, "And let's not forget, she has a history of instability." Micah didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He just spoke one sentence. Your son kicked a service dog in the ribs. Silence. A woman on the board adjusted her glasses. Another cleared his throat. The superintendent shifted in her seat. Barnes scoffed. That mutt wasn't wearing a vest. How was Colby to know it was a service dog? Micah leaned forward, calm as a storm before landfall. He wasn't supposed to know. He was supposed to not kick a living thing. The silence grew teeth. Back home, Arden curled beside Rook. She hadn't drawn since the fair. Not because the images weren't there, but because they were too loud now. Too sharp. Too bright. Not ghosts, just noise. She scrolled through messages for the first time that afternoon. Micah had set up a private account. No comments. No pressure. Just words from people who had seen her moment. Arden tapped one message open. It was a short video. A little girl, maybe 7 with dark curls and wide eyes, stood in front of her own dog, a golden retriever with a lopsided ear. The girl took a breath, trembling, and whispered, "Don't you ever touch her again." She smiled, then giggled, then whispered, "Thank you, Arden." Arden's hand moved without thought resting on Rook's head. He blinked slowly, pressed into her palm, the warmth of him real and unshaken. He hadn't barked since the fair, hadn't growled. He simply stayed. And when she fell asleep that night, arms wrapped around his neck, the only sound was the soft hum of his breath, steady, unwavering, like a promise made flesh. Outside, the town waited, some in awe, some in judgment, but all listening now, because a voice had returned. And once a voice comes back, it echoes. The letter came folded sharp and thin, slipped beneath their door on a Thursday morning that smelled like burnt toast and early rain. Mandatory disciplinary hearing. Arden Rowan. Date: Monday, 9 a.m. Location: District Hall, Room B2. Subject: Conduct unbecoming, violation of Student Code Re. Public confrontation and endangerment of peer. Colby Barnes. Micah read it 3 times, then once more. He didn't say a word. He just turned, found Arden on the porch, sketching beside Rook, and sat quietly beside her. She looked up, eyes curious but not afraid. He handed her the letter. She read it once, only once, and then turned the page over and started to draw. By Sunday night, the hearing room had been prepped like a courtroom. Long plastic tables, a pitcher of untouched water, and chairs that looked too adult for the kids they would judge. The walls were off-white and windowless, like memory loss. Arden wore jeans, a gray hoodie with the drawstrings tucked in, her hair in a low ponytail, soft strands brushing her cheek. Rook sat by her feet, perfectly still, his chest rising and falling in the rhythm of restraint. Micah had trimmed his nails, brushed his coat, not to make him presentable, but to remind the room who was loyal, who had never once lashed out even after being kicked. The board called them in at 9:03 a.m. A panel of 5 adults sat at a table facing them. In the back corner, Mr. Barnes sat stone-faced, arms crossed, like someone owed him something precious. Colby was not present. Micah suspected it was strategic. Make Arden look like the aggressor by making her words echo across an empty chair. The principal cleared her throat. "Miss Rowan, we're here today to discuss your behavior during the spring fair, specifically in regard to your confrontation with another student. Before we begin, is there anything you'd like to say?" Silence. The room waited. Rook's tail thudded once against the floor. Arden reached into her folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. No speech, no argument, just a drawing. She slid it forward. 5 sets of brows furrowed. On the page, a girl, small and silent, standing behind a large German shepherd. The dog stood between her and a dark mass, in the shape of a boy's outline, featureless, looming. The leash was drawn like lightning, connecting girl to dog, grounding both. Micah watched their eyes soften one by one. That was her testimony. And then Arden looked up. Her voice, when it came, didn't shake. It didn't ask for understanding. It declared, "They can kick him," she said, eyes locked forward. "But they won't break him. Or me." Silence dropped like a stone in a pond, a slow ripple across each face. Mr. Barnes shifted in his seat. "Emotional manipulation," he muttered. "She's milking this, weaponizing trauma for attention." Micah rose, but he didn't move forward, didn't raise his voice. He simply stepped beside his daughter, placed a hand on her shoulder, and spoke. She didn't want attention. She didn't speak for 11 months. She didn't ask to be kicked. But she asked for it to stop. And somehow, that's the crime. Rook pressed gently against Arden's leg, and for the first time in weeks, she reached down and scratched behind his ears, her fingers steady. The panel excused them 15 minutes later. No ruling was issued on the spot. But as they left, one of the women, an older administrator with silver hair, pulled into a low bun stood and followed them to the hallway. She crouched beside Arden and whispered, "My granddaughter hasn't spoken since the fire, but she watched your video, and yesterday, she sang." Then she touched Rook gently on the head, her hand trembling. "Whatever you two are doing, don't stop." Outside, the sun was soft, not warm but enough. Micah exhaled. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath since the night of the fair. They walked in silence. Until halfway across the parking lot, Arden paused, pulled out her sketchbook again, and began to draw a second image beneath the first. Same girl, same dog. But this time, the shadow was shrinking. And above the leash no longer lightning, a sunflower bloomed. The bell above the school's main doors gave a hollow clang as Arden stepped into the morning light, her sketchbook tucked against her chest like armor. Micah followed a step behind, keys jingling in one hand, the other resting protectively on her shoulder. The hearing had ended without a clear verdict, but it didn't matter, not really. She had spoken, on her own terms. Not with fists, not with blame, with her voice, with her truth. And they had listened. Rook padded quietly at her side, his gait slow but watchful, still tender in the ribs. The bandana Micah had sewn for him fluttered lightly in the breeze blue, with sunflowers stitched unevenly along the hem. Arden had embroidered them herself last night, one stitch at a time. They rounded the side of the building, heading toward the gravel lot where Micah had parked. That's when they saw it. The back wall of the school gym gray cement, flecked with old chalk and paint peels bore something new. Spray paint, red, jagged, still dripping. Mute freak. 3 feet tall, block letters. Loud in a way silence never could be. Micah stopped in his tracks. A flush of heat rose up his neck. His mouth opened, searching for something, any that could soften it. But there was nothing to say. Not yet. Arden stood very still. She didn't cry. Didn't scream. Didn't run. Instead, she walked closer. The gravel crunched softly beneath her boots. Rook followed, alert, but silent. And then, Arden knelt, right there on the cracked pavement beneath the slur. She reached out and rested one hand on Rook's shoulder, the other gripping her sketchbook like a heartbeat. And she leaned close, forehead brushing his ear, whispered. Micah couldn't hear the words, wasn't meant to, but Rook's ears perked, his head tilted. And then he did the strangest thing. He wagged his tail. Just once, then twice, like whatever she'd said had unlocked something ancient between them. Arden rose slowly, walked back to Micah, looked up at him with steady eyes, and then without warning reached into her backpack, pulled out a stick of charcoal, and walked back to the wall. Micah started to step forward, stopped himself, let her move as she needed. She stood directly beneath the word, studied it, tilted her head slightly to the left like measuring proportions, and then she drew. No hesitation, no trembling. Charcoal on cement, fast and sure. A sunflower, tall and bold, its petals half blooming out of the U in mute. Then a second, growing from the F in freak. And finally, at the bottom corner of the wall, she added the outline of a German shepherd sitting calmly, looking upward. No leash, no restraint, just presence. Micah exhaled. And maybe the wall, too, seemed to breathe just a little. Later that afternoon, after the paint had dried and the news had spread, something strange began to happen. One by one, other students began stopping by the back of the gym. Some left flowers. Some just stood silently for a few seconds and walked away. But by evening, 3 more drawings had appeared beside Arden's berry. A bluebird, a sketch of a guitar, and the words, "We hear you," written in soft pencil. No one admitted who had done them. No one needed to. That night, at home, Micah brought Arden a cup of hot cocoa. She sat curled up in the corner of the couch, blanket around her shoulders, Rook's head resting in her lap. Her fingers absent-mindedly traced the fur behind his ears. Comfort, offered and received in equal measure. Micah placed the mug on the table beside her and sat down across from her. He waited, not for her to speak, just to be near her. Finally, after a long while, she opened her sketchbook, turned it toward him. It was a new drawing, the same gym wall, same red graffiti, but now completely covered in flowers. Sunflowers, dandelions, wild poppies, and across the center, written not in block letters, but soft cursive. Words hurt, but roots grow deeper in broken soil. Micah blinked once, then again, and this time, when she looked up at him, she smiled. The envelope arrived on a Monday. No return address, no stamp, just a name, written in careful block letters across the front. Arden. Micah found it in the mailbox wedged between a grocery flyer and a power bill, its weight almost too light to notice. He turned it over once, then twice, as if expecting a clue to appear in invisible ink. When he handed it to Arden over the kitchen counter, his brows creased, but he said nothing. Arden held it for a moment before sliding a fingertip beneath the flap. Inside, a single neatly folded page, and a photograph, weathered at the edges. The photo came out first. A man in uniform holder, face sun-lined and proud, stood beside a German shepherd with salt-flecked fur and intelligent eyes. The dog wore a service vest, faded but still intact. They were in front of a barn, American flag rippling faintly in the distance. The kind of photo someone doesn't take lightly, the kind that survives floods and fire. Rook sat beside her, head tilted, eyes fixed on the image like he recognized something older than words. Arden turned to the letter. The handwriting was steady but slow, each word carved with deliberate weight, like someone who'd spent his life choosing what deserved to be said. Dear Arden, you don't know me, but I saw you. A buddy of mine sent me the video from the fair. I watched it twice before I realized I was holding my breath. That dog of yours, she's got a spine. But it was your voice that knocked the wind out of me. In 1974, I served in the 10th Infantry with a K-9 named Bramble. Saved my life twice. Lost part of himself doing it. There are things we said without words. Things only silence can carry. I don't usually write letters anymore. Hell, I barely write grocery lists. But you need to know your voice is louder than most speeches I've ever heard. And Rook? That's no mutt. That's a guardian. If you're ever out near Flagstaff, Arizona, there's a plaque in a field with Bramble's name on it. You'd both be welcome there. Stay brave. Walt Dempsey, Sergeant Rhett. Arden read it twice, then pressed her thumb gently over the name at the bottom, like somehow it could be absorbed. Micah sat across from her now, watching her face. He didn't ask what it said. He didn't need to. Her eyes had that look again. Not quite tears, not quite steel. Something braver than both. She slid the letter across the table for him to read, and stood to feed Rook. Micah's lips moved as he read. Slowly, his hand drifted over the photo when he got to the part about Bramble. Damn, he whispered. He placed the letter down like it was glass. When Arden came back, she carried her sketchbook and sat down beside him, turned to a fresh page, charcoal in hand. She began to draw, no hesitation. First, Rook, standing on a hill, chest forward, eyes fierce. Next to him, a silhouette of another German shepherd, older, scarred but proud, Bramble. And between them, a girl, small and silent, holding a sunflower like a torch. The sky behind them wasn't blank. It was filled with words, not shouted, but echoed like the wind knew how to carry them farther than sound ever could. Micah leaned over. What's that up there? He asked, pointing gently to the curve of lettering in the sky. Arden wrote carefully. Not all voices speak, but some shake mountains. Later that evening, after dinner, Arden tacked the photo of Bramble to her wall right beside one of her earliest drawings of Rook, and beneath it she wrote in pencil, "Honor is quiet, but it remembers." That night, she didn't sketch thunder or grief or pain. She drew roots, deep ones, twisting, reaching, unseen but unshakable. Because maybe that's what Walt was saying, that some things live longer when they're carried silently. And that Rook wasn't just a protector. He was part of something older, something shared. The idea started with a sigh and a sticky note. Micah had found her again at the kitchen table, surrounded by letters, some typed, some written in trembling cursive, some sent by children in crayon. Dozens had come in since the fair, a few from people they knew, most from names neither of them recognized. I didn't say anything when it happened to me. I thought I was the only one. He used to call me mute, too. I started painting because talking hurt. I never wrote a real letter before, but your dog made me brave. They were stacked by date now. Arden had organized them without a word, each one handled like something sacred. Her sketchbook sat open beside the pile, filled with drawings she hadn't shown anyone yet. One of a girl riding on the back of a wolf through a storm. Another. A series of hands, all shapes and shades, reaching down to touch the soft fur of Rook's head as he stood still like a monument. Micah stood behind her, reading quietly. And then, out of nowhere, "Arden, what if you let them talk back?" She looked up. Micah smiled, half idea, half prayer. "I mean, what if there was a place for all of this? Your drawings, their letters, all of it." She stared at him. No blink, but her head tilted just slightly, like a dog listening for a frequency no one else could hear. Micah grabbed his laptop. He cleared a corner of the table, booted it up, and cracked his knuckles like a magician preparing a trick. 2 hours later, the home page was live. A white background. Black text. No ads. No noise. Just a title in quiet. Deliberate typeface. Rook's Code. Below it, a single sentence. "There are some things only silence can explain. M." The first post was a photo. Rook lying across Arden's feet, both of them bathed in soft window light. Her hand rested gently on his paw. Caption: "This is where safety begins." The second post was a sketch, a new one. A girl seated inside a ring of wolves, each one sleeping with an ear tilted toward her. She was drawing. They were listening. No words on that one. Just the tag. Number, Guardians of Quiet. By the end of the week, Arden had posted 6 more sketches and curated 10 letters to share names changed. Typos left untouched. Stories real. Micah helped add tags. Simple ones. Number muted not broken. Number Rook's Code. Number never alone. And at the end of every post, like a signature she didn't have to speak, they added the line, "You're not alone, you never were." By Friday, the blog had 1,243 views. By Sunday, 17,400. Someone from Vermont sent in a letter and called Rook a lighthouse on 4 legs. A girl in Denmark posted a drawing of herself in a cloak made of feathers, sitting beside a dog that looked suspiciously like Rook. A veteran wrote a story about his PTSD service dog named Jupiter. Said he hadn't shown anyone his journal before, but Arden reminded him that dignity doesn't need volume. Another wrote, "I didn't even realize how much silence I'd been choking on until I saw yours and knew I wasn't drowning alone." Micah printed out that one. He taped it beside the computer desk. When he looked up, Arden was watching him. Not just watching. Her expression unreadable, but her eyes soft around the edges. He tapped the desk beside the screen. "Want to post one more?" She nodded. He opened a blank draft. This time, she typed herself. Fingers slow, careful, but steady. She uploaded a sketch. Rook in a crown made of vines and stitched thread, standing before a giant chalkboard covered in symbols only she understood. Caption: "Some languages have no alphabet, but they still teach us everything." And below that, "You're not alone. You never were." Then she hit publish. Micah didn't say anything. Rook stirred from where he lay, curled at her feet, and placed his head gently on her ankle, as if he too understood this was something big, something that wasn't loud but would echo anyway. Somewhere inside Arden's chest, something unlocked, not like a door, more like a window, one that opened just wide enough to let the light in. It began slowly, like drops before a downpour. 1 email, then 3, then 47 before breakfast. By the end of the first week, Rook's Code wasn't just a blog, it was a lifeline. Some messages were long, some only a sentence, but each carried the same fragile weight. "Me too. M." A boy in Indiana who hadn't spoken since his mother died sent a photo of his Labrador curled beside him, both wrapped in a blue blanket. The subject line read, "This is who listens when no one else does." A girl in foster care wrote about hiding in closets with her cat, Muffin, during fights that shook the walls. She signed her message, not with a name, but a sketch. A girl made of stars, standing beside a dog with a shield on its chest. A veteran from Oregon shared a black and white photo of his canine partner from Fallujah, both of them staring into the camera like they'd seen everything and were still standing. "Your silence," he wrote, "says the thing I never could in 20 years of VA group therapy. Thank you." Some stories arrived in messy handwriting scanned from journals. Others came typed, double-spaced, carefully punctuated like someone was trying to make sense of pain using grammar. One came written in Morse code. Micah translated it over dinner, tapping the table slowly. ... dash. ... The message was only 5 words. "She listens. I breathe again." At school, something shifted. The same hallway that once echoed with mockery had grown quieter. Not silence just, softened, like the walls had absorbed a kind of humility. Even teachers began pausing before they spoke to her. Not with pity, but with a new kind of reverence, like they were trying to meet her in her own language. Then, on a Tuesday morning no different than any other, Arden stepped into the library and stopped short. It was framed behind glass, mounted just beside the entrance. A full-color drawing done by a second grader named Luca. Rook, in a superhero cape, standing on top of a globe. Below him, children from every country held hands in a ring. Some were missing limbs, some wore hearing aids, some simply looked tired. But they were smiling. At the bottom, written in rainbow crayon, "He doesn't bark, he saves." Arden stood there for a long time. Rook sat beside her, head tilted, as if studying the art like a critic. Then he nudged her hand gently, breaking her stillness. She reached out and touched the glass. Micah appeared beside her, holding 2 juice boxes from the vending machine. He handed her one. She took it silently. "I heard Luca used to cry when his mom dropped him off," Micah said. "Now he carries a stuffed German shepherd in his backpack." Arden blinked slowly. Micah looked up at the framed drawing. "You didn't just help him draw. You helped him believe something stronger than fear." That week, the school announced something that had never happened before. They were creating a new section in the library. A silent shelf. Books without words. Stories told through illustration, movement, image. Graphic novels. Picture-only memoirs. Symbolic poetry. At the front of the shelf, Rook's Code Volume 1. A bound collection of Arden's sketches and letters from around the world. Each page carefully curated, captioned with just enough context, but never too much. Micah helped her scan and format. The principal had quietly paid for the first 50 copies out of her own pocket. The town newspaper ran a headline that felt like a whisper turned into a flag. "The girl who spoke without sound and was heard around the world." Oh, and still the letters came. From a boy in Brazil who only spoke through chess. From a girl in Japan who wrote music no one else could play but her dog would dance to. From a grandmother who lost her husband and sat in silence for a year until she found the blog and drew her first flower in 20 years. Some wrote in Braille. Some used voice to text. One simply sent a photo of a hand over a heartbeat. Arden never responded with paragraphs, just sketches. To the boy with the dog in the blue blanket, she sent a drawing of a fort built from books, a dog keeping watch at the door. To the girl in the closet, she drew a map of an imaginary world where closets opened into castles and every child had a wolf as a best friend. To the veteran, she sketched a badge made of stitched scars and quiet mornings. Inside it, a single word: brother. One night, long after the blog had reached 50,000 subscribers, and the framed picture in the library had been polished so often the glass caught sunlight like a jewel, Arden sat on her bed cross-legged. The letters were scattered around her again. Rook lay curled beside her, tail twitching in sleep, his breath slow and even. She picked up a letter from someone who had only signed it T. It said, "Sometimes when I walk through crowds, I pretend Rook is beside me. I imagine him steady and brave, and then I walk taller." Arden didn't cry, but her fingers shook as she opened her sketchbook. She drew a crowd of blurred faces. And in the middle T, faceless but upright. Beside them, Rook, not barking, not growling, just present, just real. And below that, for the 1,000th time in her careful, quiet script. "You're not alone. You never were." The trail behind the middle school had always been safe. It twisted gently through cedar and pine, a well-worn path where Arden and Rook had walked nearly every evening since fall. Their rhythm was quiet, Rook padding ahead, ears flicking, Arden behind, sketchbook under one arm, eyes tracing shadows that danced across tree trunks. Today felt no different. The sun had already begun its descent, bleeding orange through the canopy. Rook stopped often, nose twitching at invisible threads in the air. Arden would kneel, sketch quick line-acorns half buried, a crooked tree limb that looked like a forked antler, the curve of Rook's spine as he listened to something far beyond her hearing. She didn't carry a phone, never had. The forest was her only signal. But at 6:41 p.m., when the bell over the back porch rang twice Micah's way of calling her home for dinner, no one answered. By 7:10, he was standing barefoot on the porch, arms crossed tightly, staring out past the gravel drive. The sun had dipped behind the ridge. Crickets had begun their chorus. Still no Arden. Still no Rook. Micah stepped down into the yard, his voice low. "Rook." The name cracked the dusk like a stone against glass. Silence. He walked back inside and opened the drawer beneath the microwave where Arden kept her trail maps. One was gone. The one with the red X near Owl's Hollow. The one she never used alone. Not since the fire years ago. Micah's hand tightened around the edge of the drawer. At 7:46 p.m., the first smoke call came into the county dispatch center. 3 hikers near Ridgeback Point reported plumes rising west of Dry Creek. A breeze had picked up, pulling the scent of ash over the foothills. It smelled like memory and panic. The fire hadn't touched their county in nearly 6 years. Not since the summer the sky turned black and rain tasted like burnt leaves. But now, it was back, and Arden was out there. With no phone, and Rook. By the time Micah reached the ranger outpost near the trailhead, red lights were spinning, and radios crackled like angry insects. Volunteers from the old Wildline unit were already gearing up canvas packs, reflective tape, boots with melted soles from another life. Micah ran up to the incident commander, breath ragged. "My sister, Arden Walker, 12 years old, brown hair, mute. She was out walking our dog. They're not back." The man, maybe 50, paused. "Dog's name?" "Rook," Micah said. "German Shepherd. Large. Quiet. Trained." The commander's eyes flickered with recognition. "The Rook?" Micah just nodded. "All right," the man said, turning to his team. "Tell the line crew to watch for a kid with a dog. Tell him it's that dog." At 8:23 p.m., the first flames licked the lower brush. A hot wind peeled through the valley, dry and hungry. Fire climbed from tree limb to tree limb, dancing like it had been waiting for an excuse. Arden stood perfectly still in a clearing, Rook beside her tail, low, body tense. They'd followed the smoke by instinct. They hadn't run. Instead, they'd watched. Arden had climbed a knotted cedar, perched like a crow near the upper limbs. From there, she could see the glow moving eastward, smoke crawling along the ridge like a beast without legs. She pulled out her pencil and began to draw, not to capture it, but to remember. Below her, Rook circled twice, then lay at the base of the tree, eyes scanning every movement in the dark. A pine branch popped loudly like bone snapping. Arden flinched, but Rook didn't move. He was waiting for her signal. Back at the fire line, Micah was pacing near a utility truck when an old ranger named Walt pulled up in a rusted Bronco. He stepped out, wearing a smoke-stained K9 vest he hadn't put on in years. "I heard the dog's in there," he said, nodding toward the ridge. "Rook's the one that drew that veteran crowd, right?" Micah looked up. Walt reached into his pocket, pulling out a crumpled letter, the one he had sent months ago. He handed it to Micah. Thought maybe she'd need to hear this again, in case this gets worse before it gets better. Micah held the letter, hands shaking. A few lines blurred under the flashlight. "Courage doesn't always bark. Sometimes it just stays." Back in the clearing, the air had thickened. Rook was up now, hackles raised, ears twitching with a new urgency. The fire was coming faster than Arden had guessed. She climbed down slowly, pressing one hand to the warm bark for balance. Her fingers trembled not from fear, but decision. They could backtrack, cut through the Dry Creek bed, but it would be close. She looked at Rook. He didn't need words. He needed trust. And she gave it. With a nod, they ran. Through ash. Through wind. Through the first falling cinders. At 9:12 p.m., a volunteer spotted something through binoculars. A shape. Then two. Running fast through the underbrush. Angling west toward the ranger station. "Kid and dog," he shouted. Cheers went up along the fire line. Radios exploded with coordinates. When they burst out of the trees, Rook ahead, Arden behind him, smoke curling in their wake, it felt like the forest had exhaled. She was soot-streaked, eyes red from smoke, but alive. And in her hand, crumpled, half-burnt, was a page from her sketchbook. A single image. Rook, standing between two fire lines, teeth bared, tail still, and below it, 5 words. "He walked me home." Again, the world had turned red. Not just the trees, but the air, the ground, the sky. Even the wind felt hot, as if breathing too deep might burn from the inside out. Arden didn't remember the fall. One moment she was following Rook through the smoke-choked trail, his body low, almost crawling to stay beneath the heat, and the next, the world cracked like thunder. A dead pine, its roots rotted and loosened by heat, had split and come down like a hammer from the sky. She pushed, screamed without sound, but all that came out was dust. A heavy limb now pinned her right ankle. Splintered bark cut through her sock. She tried to drag herself backward, but the weight held her like a mouth clenched shut. Her lungs were screaming. Not for air, she had that, but for him, Rook. No voice. Just her hand, reaching weakly into the haze. And then a bark. Fierce, guttural. So loud it split the veil of smoke. Rook had turned around. He saw her, and without hesitation, he charged. When the search team later replayed the helmet cam footage from Ranger Tate's vest, the audio was shaky, intermittent crackle, but one sound rose above everything. A single furious bark. And then another. And another. Punctuated by silence. Then claws on gravel. Then the voice of a man whispering, "Jesus." He stayed. Rook had found her under the fallen tree limb. He didn't try to move it, didn't leave to find help. He did the one thing he knew how to do, guard. He lay beside her, chest heaving, nose pressed to her shoulder, as if checking every few seconds that her heartbeat hadn't changed. When the wind shifted and a spark landed too close, he stood, barked it down, then returned. His paw pads had already begun to split raw from the heat, bleeding slowly into the scorched earth. His left ear twitched uncontrollably from smoke irritation, and ash clung to his coat like soot on a chimney flue. But still, he stayed. Even as his muscles trembled from the weight of not moving, even when Arden stopped blinking, he stood like a statue built from instinct, a dog-shaped prayer refusing to be ignored. At 9:57 p.m., a team of firefighters crested the bluff above Dry Creek and caught a flicker of motion near the bend. They thought it was another flare-up, but then it barked. Ranger Tate sprinted toward the sound, voice-breaking protocol. "Dog! I see a dog!" What they found stopped them in their tracks. Rooksmoke, blackened and bleeding, was standing over a small girl, tail stiff, teeth bared. He wouldn't let them near her. "Tried to protect her," Tate whispered. The other ranger stepped forward. "Easy, buddy, easy. We're here to help." Rook didn't move, not until Arden reached up barely and touched his flank with 3 soot-smeared fingers. That was enough. He stepped aside and collapsed. The medics radioed in the find. Female, 12, responsive. Right ankle crushed under debris. Smoke inhalation. Dog K9 breed guarding her. Needs urgent care. Paw injuries. Possible burns. Sirens began to swell in the distance, and for a moment, the forest didn't feel so empty. Micah arrived, just in time to see the gurney being wheeled toward the ambulance. He didn't notice the oxygen mask on her face or the brace on her leg. He saw her hand small, dirty, but raised just enough to touch the edge of the stretcher wall. He ran alongside it until they let him grab it. "I got you, Artie. I got you," he whispered, voice cracking. But her eyes weren't on him. They were scanning, searching. Micah looked behind. Rook was being lifted by 2 firemen carefully, slowly, as if he were made of glass. One of them carried his hind legs in a canvas sling. The other cradled his chest, whispering to him like he was a wounded soldier. "Still tried to bark when we got close. one said, shaking his head. Didn't let go till she said it was okay. Rook's eyes were barely open, but they flicked up when Arden was wheeled past. Their gaze locked. A second passed, then two. Then her fingers twitched, and he wagged his tail. Once, twice, then stopped. That night, news stations picked up the story. A helicopter shot from earlier that evening too grainy to show Detalooped on repeat. But it was the firefighter's body cam that went viral. The footage froze on one image. A German shepherd standing with one paw raised, body rigid, facing a team of masked men with flashlights. Behind him, barely visible in the glow, a girl's hand reaching up from beneath a tree limb. No audio needed. It spoke louder than words ever could. In the ICU waiting room, Micah sat curled around a vending machine coffee. A nurse stepped in. They're stable, both of them. He looked up. Do you know what she wrote? The nurse added, smiling. Micah shook his head. The nurse held up a crumpled page from Arden's sketchbook. A charcoal drawing fast, rough but alive. It showed Rook, his body battered but proud, standing atop the limb that pinned her down. And below it, she had scrawled just 5 words. He wouldn't let me go. The fluorescent lights in the veterinary trauma unit didn't blink. They just hummed. A constant, low thrum, like a tired heart refusing rest. Arden sat on the edge of the steel bench, hospital gown swallowing her small frame, the thin blanket around her shoulders doing little against the sterile chill. The IV in her arm tugged slightly every time she shifted, but she ignored it. Her focus was on the gurney beside her. Rook lay still, his chest rising with mechanical rhythm. Bandages wrapped around his paws like worn boxing gloves. His snout, once noble and sharp, now smudged with ash and ointment. A patch of fur had been shaved near his ribs, revealing angry, blistered skin. But he was here, and that alone made the walls feel less heavy. Micah leaned against the far wall, arms crossed tightly. His hoodie was still soaked with smoke and panic. He hadn't spoken in a while. Didn't need to. The room was holding its breath for her. She reached for Rook, fingers trembling as they landed just above his paw. Hey boy, she whispered, barely audible. His ear twitched, and a breath she hadn't realized she was holding slid out of her lungs like rain off a window. The nurse entered softly, clipboard in hand, gaze careful. He's lucky. You both are. The burns are superficial mostly. His pads will take time, some scarring, but he'll walk. Arden nodded once, not lifting her eyes. Micah asked the questions she couldn't. Will he know who she is? Still? The nurse smiled faintly. He never forgot. Yeah. Later, when the hall emptied and the monitor's beeping settled into something less alarming, Arden broke her silence just the muteness, but something deeper. Her voice was not loud, but it came, raw, cracked at the edges. A single sentence. She turned to Micah, who had dozed off in the corner chair, and said, He stayed. It wasn't a report. It wasn't a statement of fact. It was a confession. A truth so large that her small voice couldn't hold all of it, so the room held the rest. Micah sat up, blinking. He looked at her, then at Rook, then back again. What did you say? She didn't repeat it. Just reached for Rook's muzzle, gently, as if he were made of glass and memory. He stayed, she whispered again, quieter this time. When it hurt, when it burned, he stayed. Her throat caught, and her lip trembled. He didn't run, Micah. Not even when he could have. Not even when I told him to. Micah came closer, kneeling beside her, hand on her back like he had when they were kids, and the power went out. I know, he said. I saw the footage. Everyone saw. But Arden shook her head. They didn't see it. Not really. Not like I did. She pressed her forehead gently to Rook's side, careful of his bandages. I could feel his heart, even when I couldn't move. He kept pressing into me, like he was giving me his heartbeat, in case mine stopped. She closed her eyes. He chose me over pain, over fear, over instinct. Outside the glass door, the hallway was silent, but a small crowd had gathered by the waiting room television. The news anchor was mid-sentence. A girl rescued from a wildfire, and the German shepherd who never left her side. Authorities say his condition is stable after guarding the child for over 4 hours under extreme heat. Someone had drawn a heart in the soot left on the emergency doorframe earlier. Inside it, 2 initials. A+R, not his romance, but his family. Arden didn't leave Rook's side that night. The nurses offered her a cot. She declined. She sat upright, her head resting beside his on the edge of the gurney, as machines beeped their vigil. Somewhere around 3 a.m., he stirred just slightly. His tail lifted once and fell again. She didn't cry, not the way people think of it. Her tears didn't shake her body. They didn't fall with sound. They simply gathered, welled, and fell quiet as ash. Micah, from the corner, pulled the blanket up around her. He didn't speak, because in that moment, words were too small for what had just survived fire. The next morning, the vet left a note taped to the wall above Rook's gurney, written in Sharpie, all caps, "He stayed." And underneath, in smaller script, "Some heroes don't wear uniforms. They just refuse to leave." The envelope smelled faintly of cedar and ink. Arden found it resting between a mug of chamomile tea and the prescription cream for Rook's burned paws. Her name was printed on the front in soft blue font, with a handwritten note beneath. With admiration. Rook limped outside as Micah opened the door. Arden peeled the envelope open. Inside was a letter from Little Oak Press, Children's Division. Dear Arden, we followed your story from the field to the fire, from silence to something louder than words. We'd like to invite you to write a story for our children's anthology on courage. Your voice and Rook's loyalty can help young readers understand bravery in a new way. Warmly, Miriam Clark, Senior Editor. She read it again and again. Then she whispered to no one in particular, "Yes." That afternoon, Arden sat by the window, Rook resting his head on her foot. The breeze shifted the curtains, scattering light across her notebook. Micah slid a slice of peach pie beside her. "You gonna do it?" Instead of answering, she opened to a blank page and wrote the title, "The Day the Forest Burned and My Dog Stayed." Each page came with a soft pencil sketch. A bent tree still standing, a girl and dog in the shadow of smoke, a whisper that said, "Stay." By nightfall, she had 9 pages. Before bed, she knelt beside Rook, forehead to his. "This is for the ones who stayed," she whispered. His tail thumped. She mailed the manuscript the next day. A week later, the editor replied with just 3 words. "You found it." No edits, no suggestions, just truth. When the pre-order went live, small miracles followed. The school librarian cried when she saw the title. A boy's mother stopped Arden at the post office, whispering, "He read about the fire in the paper," and for the first time he cried, not out of shame, but understanding. The vet framed the mock cover beside Rook's x-rays. And one morning, someone left wildflowers and a tiny sketch of a German shepherd wearing a cape at the school steps. The note said, "Some heroes don't fly, they stay." The library smelled of old pages and cinnamon. Rows of chairs filled with children, veterans, teens in hoodies, and the mayor trying not to look official. Rook walked beside Arden, slower now, but proud. His new vest Micah's Idiarid, Guardian of Arden. She had added a tiny embroidered star on the shoulder, her symbol for him in every sketch. At the front, a wooden stool, a mic, a glass of water. Arden didn't look at the crowd. She looked at Rook. He sat, calm, paw on her foot. She stepped up to the mic, opened her book, and read aloud. "This is not a story about being brave without being afraid. This is a story about being afraid and not running. It's about a dog who didn't speak but said everything I needed, and a girl who forgot how to speak until silence became sacred. Not a sound in the room, not even the smallest child stirred. Some dogs chase frisbees. Mine chased shadows. He stood between me and the world when I couldn't. He stayed when it hurt." At the word "stayed," Rook lifted his head. She smiled and kept reading. "You don't need to roar to be brave. Sometimes you only need to stay. No claps. Just stillness. Sacred stillness." A young boy whispered to his sister, "She sounds like when the rain starts." The librarian motioned her forward. "It's tradition. You signed the author wall." Arden drew a sunflower, then her name, Arden L. Hale. Beside it, and Rook he stayed below that. For the quiet ones who roar without sound. Micah, watching from the back, didn't blink away the tears. He'd carried one of her old sketches of a burning house, and a faceless girl for months. Now he realized. Arden had never been the ashes. She had always been the ember waiting to breathe. Outside, dusk softened the town. Micah lifted his phone and took a photo. Arden with one arm around Rook, her hand resting on the book. Above them, Author Knight, Brave Stories from the Heart. The photo would go viral by morning. Someone commented, "His vest says Guardian of Arden, but maybe she's his guardian too." That night, as rain tapped the porch, Arden lay beside Rook on the floor, the book between them. Micah strummed his guitar faintly in the background. She pressed her palm to Rook's chest. "You ready for what's next?" she whispered. Rook didn't move. But in the hush, she swore. He smiled. Silence can be a cage. Tonight, it felt like a cathedral. The lake behind Micah's cabin lay glass, still beneath a lavender dawn. Mist hovered in thin ribbons just above the water, as if the night hadn't quite finished letting go. Somewhere across the inlet, a loon called low, tremoring, a song meant only for those awake early enough to deserve it. Arden sat on the old dock, bare feet dangling over water that nipped at her toes. The wooden planks creaked with every small shift, but she liked the sound. It reminded her the dock was alive, still capable of holding their weight after all these years. Rook lay beside her, chin on his paws, ears twitching at each rustle of cattail. The fur along his ribs had begun to grow back in uneven tufts, soft as new grass. Bandages were gone now, but the pink map of burned skin would remain a quiet cartography of where the fire had tried and failed. Micah emerged from the tree line carrying 2 mugs. Steam swirled above them like lazy ghosts. He set one next to her meal with too much honey and lowered himself beside her with the grunt of a man whose knees remembered every storm. They sat without speaking for a stretch of moments that felt neither long nor short, just necessary. The lake mirrored the sky, and the sky mirrored the lake, and the three of them, girl, dog, guardian, were caught peacefully between. Arden broke the silence first, voice soft enough to belong to the mist. "Do you think he knows?" Micah didn't ask who. His gaze slipped to Rook, who lifted his head but kept those amber eyes on the water, as though watching memories ripple beneath the glassy surface. Micah sipped his coffee, let its warmth settle, then answered in the same hush the dawn required. "He knows what matters." Arden's brow knit, the way it did when she was deciding if words felt true. She brushed a fingertip across the ridge of scar hidden beneath Rook's fur. "Sometimes I feel like we dragged him through all of it. The fire, the hearings, the noise." Her eyes glistened not tears, just morning light finding them. And he never asked for any of it. Micah nudged her shoulder gently. "He asked for exactly one thing." He nodded toward the dog. "To stay. That's his choice, Artie. Not a burden." Rook sighed content, sleepy. A gull swept over the lake, its reflection cutting the water in a silver V. Arden traced that path in the air with her finger, then let her hand drop to the dock again. "I used to think," she whispered, "that silence meant things were missing, things broken." She looked at Micah. "Now I wonder if silence is just the room courage builds before stepping outside." Micah's mouth twitched into something between pride and sorrow. "Your mom once told me," he said quietly, "that bravery is a door you build yourself, but sometimes you need someone on the other side holding the frame steady while you walk through." He glanced at Rook. "Seems to me you both took turns holding that door." Arden smiled, small but real. A dragonfly landed on her knee, wings iridescent. She didn't flinch. She studied it. "I'm scared," she admitted, voice nearly gone with the breeze. "The book comes out next month. More people will know." "More question." "Are you scared they'll ask?" Micah said. "Or scared they'll stop listening?" Arden considered, then shrugged. "Both, maybe." Micah set his mug down, the thud gentle against wood. "Then answer what you want. Leave the rest to quiet." He pointed to the horizon where pale reds were bruising into gold. "The sun doesn't explain itself every morning. It just shows up. People still understand what it means." Crate. She let that settle. Let it drift through her ribs, like breath through open windows. Rook stood, stretched done, paw forward, hips loathen, settled again but closer, half leaning into her side. She wrapped an arm around his neck, feeling the steady drum of his heart. "I wrote a new ending," she said after a while. Micah's eyebrow arched. "To the book? They already sent it to print." "Not the book," she corrected. "The drawing." "Oh." She pulled a folded sheet from her hoodie and smoothed it on her lap. This time the girl and dog stood on a hill of blackened trees, but green shoots pierced the ash, tiny spears of life. Above them, the sky held both storm clouds and sunlight. Between the girl's fingers, no leash, just open palm resting on Rook's back. Underneath, 5 words in her looping hand. "Fire pass. Roots, remember." Micah exhaled a breath that trembled at the edges. "That's beautiful." Arden shrugged again, a shy thing. "It's true." They sat until the dragonfly lifted away and the mist burned off. Until morning noises grew braver, woodpecker knocks, distant boat engines, the hum of a world that hadn't caught fire today. Finally, Micah pushed to his feet. "Come on," he groaned. "Breakfast won't make itself." Arden stood, wincing as her healing ankle pressed into the boards. Rook rose with her, leaning just enough that she could balance against his shoulder. They began the slow walk back up the path, dew clinging to their shoes. Halfway to the porch, Arden paused, turning for one last look at the water. The breeze carried her whisper back to Micah's ears. "Thank you for holding the door." He wanted to say something powerful in return, something an uncle, a once broken man, might give to a niece who had taught him how to stay. But words felt too small, so he reached out and ruffled her hair, something simple, something ordinary. Her smile told him it was enough. Ahead, Rook trotted the final stretch to the porch steps, tail swaying like a banner in quiet victory. At the top, he stopped, looked back, and waited. Because that's what guardians do. It started with a single reblog at 3:17 a.m., someone in Reykjavik reposting Arden's sketch of Rook in his guardian vest, adding only 2 Icelandic words beneath it. "Við heyrum," we hear. By sunrise, Rook's code had doubled its subscribers again. The map widget on the sidebar glittered with new dots, first across Europe, then South America, then the eastern edge of Australia, where Tuesday was already stretching awake. Micah refreshed the analytics page once, then laughed softly into his coffee. "Kid," he called toward the living room, "your quiet just went global." Arden sat cross-legged in front of the window, Rook's head in her lap, sunlight painting both of them gold. She lifted a thumb in acknowledgement without looking up. Her eyes were fixed on a message that had slipped into the overnight queue. "My name is Kaido. I'm 9. I don't talk much, but my rabbit follows me everywhere. Your dog makes me feel brave. Here's a picture of us in our superhero capes." Attached was a crayon drawing, a boy and a rabbit, capes flapping behind them like bright sails. Arden saved the file to a folder titled Quiet Heroes. By midweek, Rook's Code wasn't just a blog. It was a constellation of smaller lights. Kids who had once lurked in comment sections began building spaces of their own digital treehouses, linked back to Arden's main page with a single badge: "We Stay." Benji's Brave board went up first, an 11-year-old from Toronto who posted cartoon panels about his stutter and the corgi who kept time with his breaths. Then came Silent Strings, run by a teenage cellist in Poland who turned panic attacks into vibrating sound waves and uploaded the sheet music for anyone who needed to feel what Fearless looked like on a staff. Therapists in 3 states emailed Micah for permission to print Arden's sunflower graffiti drawing on handouts for group sessions. One counselor wrote, "Your art explains safety faster than any breathing exercise I teach." Arden replied with a 1-line sketch. A circle of chairs, all occupied by different animal scat, dog, rabbit, even a turtle each, wearing headphones, labeled "Listening." But the message that made her pause came from a girl named Hallie, age 12, South Carolina. "I have selective mutism. My therapy cat's name is Whiskers. We read your blog together, he naps," I read. "I want to help others too, but I'm scared. Would it be okay if I started a site called Whiskers Speak? I think animals talk. And maybe we can too, in our own way." Arden's response was only 4 words. "You already started. Welcome." Hallie launched her page that weekend. The banner featured a calico cat wearing oversized glasses, tail curling into a speech bubble that read, "Purr, mission to be heard." Within 48 hours, she had 30 stories from foster kids who whispered confessions into feline fur, from autistic teens whose cats sensed overload before humans did, from a widower who credited his tabby with catching his tears when no one else saw. Arden spotlighted Whiskers Speak on Rook's code, adding a new tag number, Sister Voices, and a sketch of Rook and Whiskers sitting back to back, capes touching, looking out over a city made of pencil clouds. Envelope snow began arriving at Micah's mailbox, letters postmarked from places Arden hadn't dreamed of visiting: Kenya, Peru, Finland, some in English, some not. One contained pressed lavender petals and the words, "For Rook's Pause reminds me of our farm dog Jomo who watched my brother through seizures." They created a ritual. Every Saturday morning, Micah brewed cinnamon hazelnut coffee, Arden brewed peppermint tea, and they opened 5 letters each slowly, reverently, while Rook sprawled between them, soaking in the cadence of gratitude. One envelope bulged with Polaroids. A support group in Ohio, all ages, each person holding a sign that said either stay or sunflower or star. On the back of the last photo, someone had written, "We borrowed your courage until ours showed up." Arden pinned the photos above her desk in a long ribbon that bent around Rook's framed vet badge, creating a mosaic of faces stitched together by something bigger than geography. Late one night, Micah found her in the glow of the computer screen, eyes glassy but alert. "You should sleep," he urged. She pointed to the monitor. A new blog had appeared. Hushed lighthouses built by 2 brothers in foster care who used stop-motion Lego films to reenact moments they couldn't describe in words. Their first upload showed a minifigure dog braving plastic flames to reach a smaller figure lying beneath a beam. Micah squeezed her shoulder. "Will you draw them something?" Arden nodded, already flipping to a fresh page. A lighthouse made of Lego bricks, its beacon shaped like Rook's paw print, shining across dark water. Within a month, Rook's Code surpassed 100,000 subscribers. Arden never mentioned the number online. Metrics felt too small for what was happening. Instead, she posted a single image, an empty chair beside a campfire under night stars, and the caption, "Pull up a seat. We kept it warm. You're not alone. You never were." Comments flooded in like gentle rain. "I didn't know I had a seat anywhere. Thank you. Keeping this picture on my phone for the nights I forget. My dog fell asleep under my chair while I read this. Guess he saved my seat." One evening, Arden and Micah drove into town for groceries. On the community corkboard sat a flyer. Quiet Creators Meetup. Share nonverbal art and stories. Inspired by Rook's Code. Below that, Hallie's cat doodle smiled in Sharpie. Arden traced the outline of the cat, then tucked the flyer into her pocket. She didn't speak the rest of the trip, but her grin said everything the aisle lights needed to hear. Back home, she posted a final sketch for the day. Rook curled at the base of a massive tree whose branches stretched across multiple panels, each limb dedicated to a different animal: rabbit, cat, parakeet, horse, each paired with a kid whose mouth was closed but whose eyes shone wide. In the trunk she wrote, "Roots connect under soil long before leaves meet in the sky." Micah read it over her shoulder, voice husky. "That might be your best yet." Arden clicked publish. The cursor blinked, waiting for her signature line. She typed it, paused, then added 2 new words. "You're not alone. You never were. We stay." Rook's tail thumped at the familiar sound of the keys. Arden laughed at a quiet puff of joy and leaned down until their foreheads met. Letters would keep coming. Blogs would bloom. Quiet would keep teaching the world how to listen. And somewhere beyond the back porch, the night carried their whisper steady, evergreen, loud enough for those who needed it. Stay. The last harvest moon of the year hung fat and low, tinting every blade of autumn grass a shy shade of gold. Down in the meadow behind the cabin, summer sunflowers had gone to seed, their heads bowed like monks in evening prayer. The hush felt intentional, as if the crickets, the breeze, even the distant highway had agreed to step back so one small story could finish telling itself. Arden chose the field because it was where the whole thing had started, the very first place she'd found color again after months of charcoal smoke. Tonight, she laid a wool blanket on the ground, unpacked her sketch kit, and inhaled cool air that tasted faintly of pine and promise. Rook followed at a slower pace, his heeled pads pressing soft indentations into the soil. He sat with a satisfied groan and rested his head in her lap, as though nothing in the universe made more sense. Up at the house, Micah watched from the porch, coffee in hand. He could have joined them, They would have welcomed him, but some moments are doorways one must walk through alone, and he knew this was hers. So he became the quiet guardian of the guardians keeping distance, keeping vigil. Arden opened a fresh sheet of heavyweight paper. The surface caught moonlight in a way that almost looked liquid. She tested a charcoal stick against the corner, just a whisper of pressure, and felt the familiar grit bloom under her fingertips. She exhaled. Then she began. First came the horizon, line gentle, rolling, the shape of comfort. Next, she drew a girl, barefoot, standing with shoulders squared toward something vast and waiting. For the first time in a long time, Arden gave the girl a mouth not open in scream or sealed in fear, but soft, steady, waiting to speak. In the girl's right hand, she sketched a microphone. Not a shiny stage prop, no cords, no stand. Just a handheld mic, simple and solid, the kind used at school assemblies and town hall fairs. Its wire trailed off the page, disappearing, as if connecting to every ear willing to listen. On the girl's left side, she brought Rook to life-broad chest, proud stance, tail curved in a relaxed arc. No scars drawn. Scars existed, they always would, but tonight they didn't matter. What mattered was presence. Dog and girl, stories braided together like roots under soil. Arden paused, glancing at the real Rook, dozing against her knee. She scratched behind his ear. His tail thumped Tuiseno more, no less reminding her he was here, still staying. She turned back to the page and added a final detail. Wind. Kissed grass bending just enough to show the direction of an unseen breeze, as if the field itself leaned closer, ready to catch whatever words might fall. Then she set her charcoal down. No shading, no sunflower halo, no lightning leash. This image didn't need the symbolism of storms or scars. It breathed all on its own. Arden studied the drawing for a long breath, head tilted like a sparrow listening for rain. She searched for any missing piece and extra star, a hidden signature, but nothing asked to be added. The silence around the page felt finished, whole. Slowly, she lifted her phone, took a softly lit photograph, and uploaded it to Rook's code. The cursor blinked in the caption box, waiting for its familiar closing line. Arden watched it pulse, 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 then tapped publish without typing a single word. The post went live at 9:27 p.m. Micah's phone buzzed on the porch. Across town, the librarian's desktop pinged. In a dormitory 3 time zones away, a student in noise-canceling headphones refreshed her feed and gasped. Hallie, the cat blogger, whispered "look" to whiskers curled on her bed. The brothers behind hushed lighthouses paused mid-animation to watch the image bloom on their screen. A girl, a dog, a microphone, and enough quiet to cradle them all. Comments descended like soft snowflakes. It doesn't need words, she's holding one. I can hear the silence. It's beautiful. When she's ready to speak again, the world will lean in. Within minutes, the illustration spread beyond the blog shared on teacher forums, mental health feeds, military service dog networks. Some users overlaid their own pets beside the drawn pair, forming digital collages titled, "We're Still Here Too." Arden placed her phone face down and closed her eyes, listening not to pings or vibrations but to the real world, the low hoot of an owl, the hush of grass brushing Rook's fur, her own breathing woven with his. She whispered, almost accidental, "Now they listen." Rook's ear twitched, as if acknowledging the truth. Micah, hearing from the porch, let out a breath he'd been holding since the wildfire. He stepped inside to give her the night. Under the moon's patient glow, Arden slid her sketchbook back into its pouch. Instead of standing, she lay on the blanket, knees bent, eyes tracing constellations she could not name. Rook rolled onto his side, spine fitting the curve of her body in practiced symmetry. Together they watched clouds drift like slow ships, content with simple things. Heartbeat, breath, belonging. Somewhere beyond the tree line, a wind chime clinked a reminder that sound still mattered, that silence was only half the story. But tonight, neither dog nor girl felt pressed to speak. They had said enough in charcoal and staying. On Rook's code, the view counter ticked upward, but Arden didn't see it. She didn't need to. Metrics could not quantify the hush of a planet tilting its ear toward one field, one whisper, one survivor returned. And on a wall inside the library of their small town, The framed drawing of Rook in his cape caught moonlight through the skylight window. The colors shimmered faintly as if the whole building breathed a satisfied sigh, echoing one final message back into the night. Still here. In the end, Arden's journey isn't just a story about a girl and her dog. It's a reminder that love, especially the steadfast love of an animal can, coax light from the deepest ash. German shepherds like Rook embody the very best of that bond. Loyalty that doesn't bargain, courage that doesn't boast, patience that waits until we're ready to speak. Their silent wisdom teaches us that gentleness and strength can live in the same heartbeat. When we choose kindness toward animals, we cultivate empathy in ourselves. When we defend the voiceless, whether they walk on 2 legs or 4, we declare that compassion is worth more than noise. Rook's code became a chorus of quiet voices around the world, proving that even the softest whisper can echo as far as hope is willing to travel. May every reader carry forward that lesson. Listen first, protect fiercely, and stay when it matters most. Because somewhere, a child is finding courage beside a faithful dog, and the world becomes gentler each time we choose to honor that unspoken pact.